everyone, what's up, hoes and pimps? Welcome to the show, the Timeless Gamer Show, where our gifts and our bodies may grow out of date, but our gaming experiences will forever remain. Hey, it's Timeless, the show to be. All right, and we are now live on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook, and you can listen to us. You can still check our previous episodes by going to the YouTube channel. You can still go to our website, timelessgamers.com, or just listen to us talk going to your favorite audio streaming platforms out there, your favorite place where you get your podcast and all that. We should be there. Just search in Timeless Gamer Show for any violent comments, remarks, questions, suggestions, what have you. Just drop us a line by going to timelessgamers.show@gmail.com. And previously on the Timeless Gamer Show, we went to the movies, specifically talking about video games stemming out from movies. And if you are curious on what our selections were, you know what to do. You know where you should go. And we would like to take this opportunity to give our thanks to Streamyard and BitMap, and say thanks and hello to our Retromancy cohorts, Shuffle Emporium and Retro Unlimited and Studio.ph, and of course the Sega Mega Masters podcast show. Now, introducing the panel for tonight, Miss I.
Hi everyone, welcome to Timeless Gamers as we talk about why not emulation. Hope you also input your opinions on the comments down there.
Why not emulation indeed? And of course, Sir Jose.
Hey guys, Jose, Dark Gothic Fate here. We're talking emulation. Why or why not you should be doing this one thing that everyone has probably done once in their life. That's it for me. Once, at least once.
To be or not to be, that is the question. Sir JDIM.
Hello everyone, Happy New Year and welcome back to the Timeless Gamer Show where we talk about emulators and emulation and what have you.
And of course, Sir Joel.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are. This is Joel Baklit of the Banyagang Native channel here on Timeless Gamer Show again. And like Miss Eileen says, we are going to be discussing emulation and emulators and why or why not. And I hope you guys join in on the discussion, not just here on the live show, but also in the recorded shows. Our chats will always be open here on Facebook and on all the other platforms that we are streaming. Don't hesitate to put in your inputs even after the live show because we always read your chats. It's our pleasure. Back to you, Joe.
And the person responsible who wants to go dive in the black and white of within the gray area of emulation, Sir Viraj.
Yeah, this is going to be a very interesting show, a very controversial show, but I think it's a subject matter that we've always skirted around on previous episodes and really didn't want to delve into because of the nature of it. But yeah, be interesting to go there, let's go there. Let's do it because it's something that we should discuss. It's an important thing.
All right, thank you for that, Sir Viraj. And before we go to what is emulation, when is emulation? Or where is emulation? Let's talk about gaming news for now.
Emulation. Come on. Yeah, I can't believe nobody put that in. Okay.
Why is emulation? All right. So, gaming news for the last few days. Nintendo just casually announcing the Switch 2.
To no one's surprise.
Like
Very short notice.
It was just blindsided, like it's just there. So guys, have you watched the trailer? So let's go round table. Sir Jose, what say you Switch 2? Did you like it?
It looks nice. Like we didn't really get much information. It's just basically what the console itself looks like. it looks bigger. We didn't get no price, no release date. It looks like it's still gonna be the OLED model base, maybe going forward. But other than that, like I guess we'll just wait till that Nintendo Direct to see what else it says about it.
All right. Thank you for that, Sir Jose. Basically, just like the OLED announcements, just bigger. That's it. How about you, Sir JDM? What can you say about the Switch 2?
Um, it was during the evening when I saw this. Someone shared the video of the reveal, and um, from what I saw, it was just the OLED with. It's like um, the 3DS. Then they introduced the new 3DS XL. It was like that, and let's see if um, maybe it will be able to it's backwards compatible with the original Switch. And I'm also looking forward with the games that will come with it on release date, and how it will look on the new system.
All right. How about Miss I? What can you say about the reveal?
I would say I'm surprised, but I guess with the Switch release long ways ago, I suppose it's about time to release the Switch 2. And I would say since I haven't got myself the first Switch, I'm not sure with what is the difference between the two. But I hope there is a significant jump between the technologies so that the players fleshing out their money would be, I would say, satisfied with how the Switch 2 would be. I hope it's worth their money.
All right. How about Sir Joel? What can you say? Switch 2.
Well, I think I kind of reflect the general sentiment on the internet that I've been seeing about it. Blah, meh. It's like generally people say, okay, sure. It's like you just tossed it out there with no fanfare, no preamble, no nothing. One game to showcase, which is to be expected. The Mario Kart racing thing. All right. It's like okay. About the only thing that I worried about was the fact that it was obviously the Joy Cons. They showed it them being magnetic, if I remember correctly, from the video, and that worries me. Magnetic connection of the Joy Cons to the side of the Switch 2 is going to lend to a lot of excited moments of playing it and then it popping off and then maybe even the whole Switch 2 dropping down the middle. That scares me. But I don't know if they've constructed anything to stop that from happening. We'll see. But it's more like, call it fatigue on my part, because I discussed this in our private chat. I'm really not looking forward to it because of the fact that I've got a tremendous pile of Switch games already, the original Switch games and all the other old games that I have to go through. So I don't think I'm going to be adding to my pile of new stuff anymore. So meh, blah. Yeah.
Meh, blah. How about Sir Viraj? I think he's going to get one.
Well, I think, look, like Sir Joel said, I think the reveal was a bit of anticlimax, and I think the reasons for it was there was a leak. It did leak, and we did sort of know it was coming. So it's like they just waited so long to reveal it. So I think they could have. They did announce last year they are going to release their successor. Now I think Nintendo have been under pressure to make a successor for so long. It's unusual for a console to have a lifespan of 8 years, which is what the Switch has had. And the Switch is will probably go on to be the most popular selling console of all time, because it's looking like the figures could overtake PS2. Crazy, right? But it's true. Look, my thoughts are on, like, look, they've revealed the aesthetic of it. Okay, it just looks like a nice, fancier looking OLED. It's a bigger unit, so I think for me, my handheld days are over. But it's not truly a portable console, and I think even though the Switch is a portable console, I've never really liked the sort of size of it. For me, Nintendo handheld died with the DS line, and even that wasn't really that portable. So, for me, it's something that you'll dock into your TV. Hopefully, it's a 4K output. Hopefully, it's a 4K feed that runs at 60 because it needs it. And the Switch itself was an underpowered system, even when it came out. It's weaker than its competitors, but it's done very well. I think it's quite easy to program games for. I'm sure this is going to be successful. That's going to be a foregone conclusion. I'm going to call the price at $399.99. I'm going to say that's what it's going to be, $399, £399. Maybe there'll be a more expensive model. And that's because Nintendo, I think they're the only developer of, only big player that actually makes money on their systems, whereas Microsoft and Sony actually sell their systems at a loss and make the money back on the online and all the other stuff that they sell with it. Mario Kart, I think that might very well be a release title for it. Prime 4 had better be a release title for it. I will buy one on launch only because I love Metroid so much. That's the only reason, if Prime 4 does come out with it. I don't think it's going to fly off the shelf straight away, but I could be wrong. Do I think scalpers are going to be at it? Yep, as they normally will do. But I think that most people are educated now and won't buy it and pay the scalper prices. But I can see that happening if it's a winter, November release for Christmas. So I can see that happening. But I think, is it going to be a success? Yes, it will be. In regards to your point about the magnetic thing slotting in, I'd like to think that they won't be stupid enough not to allow it to lock in effectively so they won't fall off. So I think, Joe, you have every reason to be anxious about it. But let's see. And in regards to your Switch part, well, it is backwards compatible. You can play Switch games on it. Not all of them, but we'll see which ones aren't compatible. But it should update, maybe upscale the graphics as well. I don't know. Maybe it'll be a better handheld mode to a normal Switch. The normal Switch is only 720p output on the screen. Maybe it'll be a full HD. So it'll be a much needed upgrade for someone like me who just has a normal Switch. But let's see that it actually has good hardware, because all we've seen is the aesthetic. We don't know what the guts is. We don't know what that top USB-C socket is on the bottom and top floor. It could have things that we don't even know. And one thing I like about Nintendo, and I'm sure all of you will agree here, is that unlike all the other contemporaries, we expect better graphics, more power. They usually have something added, an optional, something extra that makes it much more of an interesting system to play with. So let's see what the sort of gimmick, shall we say, or red herring, or whatever it is you want to say that they're going to throw in. So that's my thoughts on it. So let's wait and see until we know what the guts of it are and the specs are, and what software is. Because it's the software that makes Nintendo, not how powerful the system is, which I'm sure we can all agree. Right. So that being the main news of the week for gaming, the Switch 2, shall we begin our special episode on emulation? Why not? Well, with the way gaming has gone, there's a lot of retro gamers out there, and there are other ways to play these games, and that's what we're going to explore. So, first of all, what is emulation? Well, to emulate means to copy. Okay, it's another way to copy these console games that we loved, that were near and dear to our hearts, and play them on other devices, notably on our PCs, which is what is basically what we know it as. Now, emulations are basically a software. It's a software that will emulate the console, and you can download it via websites on the internet onto your desktop computer, providing it's Windows. But there are emulators for Apple computers now, but it's predominantly a Windows thing. And you can download the ROMs for these games, which are, let's say they were on cartridge originally. Somebody had devised a device that went from the cartridge onto your computer and uploaded it to the internet, and that ROM now can be downloaded and played on an emulation device on your PC, and it doesn't cost you anything. Okay, so it's another way to play these games, which is basically what the main episode is about. When did this start becoming a thing? I mean, for me, it was a case of, my first experiences with emulation was in the late 1990s. We're talking about Windows 98 era, when I saw my cousin who downloaded an emulator for the Mega Drive or Genesis, and that's when I discovered the Mega Drive was called the Genesis in America, because the emulator was called Gen. What's it called Gen? What's this Genesis? And there's so many emulators at the time. Some would be better than others, and they perfected them. and he was playing a game for this system, and I thought, wow, this is really cool. This is another way to play it, and that was sort of my experience. And another one was when Pokemon Gold had come out for the Game Boy, and there was a Game Boy emulator, and we'd play that on that, and we'd play it that way. So my first sort of, and you could play, and that's how I played Pokemon Gold before I got it for the Game Boy. I just spent hours playing it on my PC with the Japanese ROM patch, because the Japanese ROM came out first, and we played it. I played it that way, and obviously it's not the official way of playing it. You lose out on certain features, and that's obvious. You can't battle Pokemon; it's just a single player experience. But going back to the Mega Drive, I got to know this. I mean, I had like 40 to, I think I had around 40 games on my original Mega Drive system in my collection at the time. Before that, it started to get reduced, and I started working out to get them cheap afterwards. But another way to play games for a kid who doesn't work for a living, who's a teenager, who can't work, whose parents can only buy so many games, another way I could play these games is just downloading them and trying them and playing them on this emulation. That's how I was introduced to emulation, Windows 98, Windows 2000 era, Windows XP era, I should say, when emulation was more or less at its peak for 16-bit stuff. And obviously, as time has gone on, the later platforms were emulated and copied later on onto the PC. So that was my experiences with when I first dipped my toe into emulation. What I'm curious to know, good people, is what was your first experience with emulation? I'm going to start with Miss I, who's right next to me. So, what was your experience with emulation?
My first experience was actually around 1999, I would say.
Yeah.
And the first one I got to play was Pokemon, the first 3 Pokemon games on No Dollar GB, if anybody remembers that one. It's how we got introduced to the Pokemon games, because I don't remember really going to video game stores and looking.
Is that the way we say it? No dollar GB, or is it no?
I mean, some people call it no
Like-
dollar. Some people call it no cash. No cash GB. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's news to me. Some people actually call it no cash GB. I did not know that.
Yeah, I mean, nobody knew how to say stuff way back in 1999. So, but yeah, go ahead, Miss Eileen.
So that's how I got introduced to emulation. And after that, my brother also got ZSNES. And sorry, I pronounce it SNES instead of SNES or Super Nintendo. I'm not sure if there are others like me, so I call it SNES. And we got to play not only the games that we had physically, but also got to try other games, whether Japan or North American versions. And apart from those 2 platforms, we also got to actually purchase Bleem. And it's, if anybody knows, I know the panel knows it, but for our viewers, Bleem was a PlayStation 1 emulator. I think it's the first one, if I'm not mistaken. And the funny thing is, we bought a copy, I suppose, of Bleem, and a physical copy, as in a CD-ROM, was delivered to us via mail from America over here to the Philippines. And the funny thing is, we used a credit card, and the credit card got compromised, unfortunately. So there's that. It's just a funny story. So there we got to experience different games from different platforms. Excuse me, different platforms, and we got introduced to many games that we did not have, whether games that we own or the rentals around our area. So it was, I would say, a blessing for financially speaking, because as we know, Filipinos aren't as wealthy as other countries, so it wasn't easy to acquire games.
All right. Thank you very much for your opinion and your memory there. All right. So yeah, the point you raised is it was actually a very profound point, which is you emulated to do with it was just economically viable for you to play these games because video games are expensive. Now let's just touch on this very quickly. Video games, and I as a video game reseller, and I have this discussion with a lot of my traders. I think I mentioned it previously on the show before. is video games of the past are more expensive than video games of today, back when they were released, because this was cutting edge technology. And it's those people who spent that money on video games that allowed this industry to snowball into the billion-dollar industry it is, allowed R&D to basically the video games cost, even though video games got better, the cost got cheaper of the video game itself. And video games now are at the cheapest point that they've ever been, if you really, really want to look at it that way. For example, in '97, I think a PlayStation 1 game in the UK, I'm sure it was the same in America, it was probably around £40 to £50 on release. That's how much it cost you. Now, it's still about the same price. You think, well, what are you talking about, bro? Are you crazy? Yeah, it's still about £40 to £50 money for a new release video game. Yes, but that £40 in 1997 was probably £80 in today's money, if we're thinking about it. And a lot of people don't take that inflation figure into account. So yes, it was more expensive then than it is now. And of course, I thank my father in particular, because he was the one that got me into this sort of stuff and got video games to begin with, because it was an expensive toy for any child to have. And there's only so many video games you could have as well. You'd have like maybe one on your birthday and that was it, and you had to pick a choice. But there were so many others, and you're missing out on so much. And obviously, I'm talking about being from a developed nation. Obviously, Philippines is a developing nation where economy is growing, and not people. I mean, this is a luxury item, especially in the Philippines. So, how can we play this really cool stuff? How can we get our hands on it? Well, emulation is the option, which is obviously what you've stated, Miss Eileen. So I can totally understand that. Right, Mr. Jose.
Yes.
Fate. Let's hear your story of when you were introduced to emulation. I want to hear it.
Let's see. We got our first PC when I was in towards the end of junior high in 2000. And I remember one day my brother came home he was in high school, and he was like, "Hey, I just found out that we can play all these old games on our computer." And I was like, "No way, you're a fucking liar." And he's like, "No," and he it was dial up, so he fucking took a while to download the emulator, find
this time I'm not lying.
Dial up, yeah.
And an hour later he's fucking playing Super Mario Bros. And I was like, "What?" I was like, "No way." And it was like weird because you had to play with the keyboard, but I was like, "No way." So then what was the name of the emulator? It was Nesticle. That was the first one.
Yeah.
And then I found Miss Eileen, I found ZSNES, and then I used SNES 9X. And I was just downloading all the games that we used to own. And then I from there oh my god, I just kept downloading everything. I was like, I never played this. I didn't even know this came out. So it was just game after game, just hogging up the phone line, just downloading all this stuff. I was like, oh my god, I didn't even know this was possible. And then I remember you could do PlayStation games with Bleem. And then on my computer wasn't that great, but it was still like, oh my god, I can't believe the computer can actually do this. And then for other devices, I don't know if you guys remember when Bleem released discs for the Dreamcast.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I remember because originally it was going to be Bleem itself on the Dreamcast, and then Sony got all mad, and then they only ended up releasing 2 discs. It was a Metal Gear disc and a Gran Turismo 2 disc. And we own the Gran Turismo 2 disc, but I have no idea what happened to it. It could be somewhere in storage for all I know right now. But I remember playing PS1 games on the Dreamcast and them looking better and being like, I can't believe this kind of stuff is happening right now. But that's
a very interesting type of emulation, isn't it? Because we're using another platform.
Yeah.
An emulator on this more advanced platform to play. So from the generation before, which is PS1 on Dreamcast.
Yeah.
It's 64. Well, you could argue Dreamcast is 64 bits because the bus, but it's 128-bit GPU on the Dreamcast, and a 32-bit game could easily run on it. It's just getting the software to get it to run, and that's what you've done. So that's actually really clever. I've never known anyone actually to do that. You're the first person to actually have said, "I've done cross." Well, I know someone who has done it with the Xbox because he modded his Xbox so he could emulate for it. So what you've done is similar with PlayStation with Dreamcast. So that's really interesting. That
Yeah,
Dreamcast.
there was a disc too that you could burn and put ROMs on it for Super Nintendo on your Dreamcast. I remember
Well,
doing that too.
the Dreamcast was a console that it flopped. A lot of people started buying it when it went down because you could just pirate the Dreamcast.
Yeah.
Do an emulation. That's something else, and that's why Dreamcast started flying off the shelves when it went to clearance. But yeah, okay, so that's a really interesting story. Obviously, it was a case of with you, your brother, it was through a sibling, and said we could do it on PC. Watch this, and obviously you mentioned how 56K, 56K back in the day. Goodness me, kids don't know how lucky they have it. But you waited for the emulator to download. You waited for the ROM to download. After several minutes or however long it took, you had the ROM, you had it, and you play it on your keyboard. And I'll always remember my brother and I playing on the keyboard. I'd take one corner of the keyboard, he'd take the other corner of the keyboard. I'll say, no, I'm taking the arrow keys here. You can take the WASD. All right, that's your side. Play, and the good thing about ZSNES is you could do net play as well, so you could actually play with someone in America, and I did that, playing Mario Kart with them, which was cool. So emulation back then, like the SNES, you could never do net play, but the emulator allowed me to do that. So there was some benefit there. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, with you, it was the joy of I can play all these games, and you just tried all these games. And it's a similar story with me. Like, what's this game? It's called Alien Soldier. Wow, that sounds like a bad man name. I never heard about this game. I just looked at the title because back in those days, ROM sites just had titles, and you click on the link, and it would go purple, and that was it. And you just download the game. It didn't have any information on it. And that's when I discovered some of these hidden treasures and gems on my favorite console, the Mega Drive. And with you, it's a case, obviously, with SNES and with PlayStation, you get to try all these new stuff that you never had. So, and obviously the whole playing PlayStation games on your Dreamcast, that's really funny as well. Great story, Jose. All right, over to you, JDM. I want to hear your story as to when you first got your grips to emulation.
So for me, I was rather late, kind of late with emulators. Just like, let's see, from the comment here, from J Malos, he mentioned that his first emulation was from 3.5 diskette with save Game Boy emulator playing Pokemon Blue. That's exactly me when back in 2003 when I graduated high school. I went to this one of my classmates' house, and I was trying to see his big box PC collections. Then I saw him playing what do you call this game? I think it was Pokemon, the third generation of Pokemon, Sapphire and
Yeah, Ruby Sapphire.
Ruby.
Hmm.
He was playing that game, and I didn't even know that there was already a sequel for the second gen games. And I asked him, "How are you able to play this game on your PC without using on your PC?" And he told me about the emulators. I think he was using the Visual Game Boy Advance, and
VBA.
yes, the VBA. Then he told me that um, he was using an emulator. Then I asked him, "How do you play it? How do you set it up on your computer?" Then he asked me. He asked me if I have a like this floppy diskette that I could use to copy it, but he told me that I won't be able to copy the emulator and the game because it's like 4 megabytes. It was 4 megabytes, and those diskettes only come in
3.4
one.
megabytes. Yeah,
Yeah,
3.44 megabytes on a floppy disk.
yeah.
You don't have enough space.
That was a floppy disk, but if you have the diskette, it's 1.44 MB only. So
Yeah.
he could only give me a copy of the Game Boy emulator and either of the um, those Gen 1 PC games and those gold and silver.
Yeah.
So that's the those are the games that I've played when I discovered the Game Boy emulator, which I played on our Windows 98 PC. It was a Pentium 2 machine, and I had a lot of fun playing it. And like Sir Jose mentioned, he downloaded ROMs from somewhere. I'm not gonna say because we've all done it, and that was my first taste of video game emulation.
Wow. Okay, so that's very interesting because you pretty much mentioned using the floppy disk. And it takes me back to when I was in school and how people would be like they didn't know how to do it, so I'd like, but even back then I used to like chart. Like, this is how dark I was, which is basically people like, and I could get floppy disks cheap back then because it was an old technology in the late 90s because everyone had moved on to compact disks pretty much. And on the school computers, people would ask me, look, I see you playing Sonic the Hedgehog on the school computer the other day. I want to do the same thing. And give me Streets of Rage, and they're asking me for all these games. I said, yeah, give me £2. I'll do it for you. And I'd capitalize on it, because it's my skills that you want. You don't.
That's when it all started. No?
That's when it all began. That's when I started making like money out of these sort of things. I said, there's some money here. I could make an enterprise here. I'm not doing this for free. So I'd make money out of these kids, and these kids would be grateful because, you got Sonic 3 running on this, you got this running, you got this. So it was fun. But yeah, again, like playing games on the Game Boy on your PC was great because, like, not everybody could, not all parents can afford the Game Boy itself. I mean, or would buy it for their kids, And also, I think parents were sick and tired of replacing batteries for their kids on their Game Boys that would run out. There's another way to play these games, etc., etc. And you got a nice big screen as well. So I think, yeah, pretty cool story, JDM. What about you, Sir Joel? What was your experience? Because you're obviously not as young as us. I don't mean to be, cruel, but you obviously were more mature in the late 90s. So you might have been emulating before us back when. You tell us the story when you started.
Actually, my emulation progression kind of mirrors Jose, except in my case, I started off in college. It was the advent of the internet. The first computers connected to the internet showed up in our library in De La Salle University, and everybody was scrambling for internet time during that era. I had a Pentium 286 during that time as well, if I remember correctly, and that when I first heard through excite.com about something called Nesticle. That's when I read about it, tried it out, downloaded it, blew my mind absolutely. Seeing Nintendo games being played on the PC in my school library, in blatant view of every student passing by. Seeing somebody connected to the internet playing Nintendo NES games on the library computer. Everybody who swung by in the back said, "Oh, that's cool," and then they started hanging around in the back and seeing what it could do. It was Nesticle, and then afterwards I found out about Genecyst, Genecyst. Then something came out. My timelines are completely scrambled here, and something came out in 2002, if I remember correctly, which is something that a lot of people don't discuss as often, but I really want to put out there. DOSBox came out in 2002 because of the fact that the PCs during that time were already moving way too fast for old DOS games. A lot of DOS games did not run on PCs, modern day PCs of that time, 2000s. DOSBox came out, and it allowed me to play all these old DOS games on modern, during that time, PCs to catch up on my backlog of DOS games during that time too.
Okay.
Files were being shared using MIRC, and I would download ROMs that way, and it would be a slow progression of finding out all these emulators that would come out. Like Jose said, the disc compilations of SNES games on Dreamcast came out. ZSNES, SNES 9X, No Cache GBA, that allowed me to explore all the libraries that I had and wished that I could have in all these different platforms on PC. And it was quite a journey, actually. Starting off from that school library in De La Salle University all the way to today, I'm still very much an advocate of emulation as a viable choice for convenience, for convenience's sake, and for historical research, because of the fact that, sure, you want to research on actual hardware, but sometimes it's just not possible because of either means or accessibility, or because of region locking, things like that, or plain and simple because of the fact that it's just not available anymore, no matter where you look. If you want to do historical research and it's just not available wherever you can go, sure, you can look up a video, but there's something to be said about actually fiddling around with the thing for you to be able to understand the gameplay. And that's my journey.
Or it's just, let's just get back to what, it's just too expensive. That game is so expensive. Somebody used the term window licking prices to me once. You'd have to be crazy to spend that kind of money. And I'm like, what do you mean? What does that mean? Oh, and then he explained to me what window licking meant, and I'm like, oh, right, great, okay, so that's so rude. But anyway, so some people think it's ridiculous. The resale price of this game is because of how rare it is now. I still want to play this game, and that in itself is its own conundrum, which is. And we'll touch on what that means as well later on in the show. But yeah, I can totally understand accessibility because it's not available, it's hard to get, or it's just too expensive now because it's hard to get. Okay, very interesting story you've told us, Joel, about your insight, which is unique compared to all of ours because you were a mature adult when all this came out, and you mentioned the DOS and how even that was hard to get hold of later on later computers to play. And I totally agree with you. It's heartbreaking that there is a history of really old games that we can't access now on modern computers or play, and we have to use other means to play it. I mean, I have a friend called David, and he deliberately bought an old PC just to play those old games. That's how crazy he was, because it's the only way he could play those games. I said, you could get them on Steam, man. No, I have the CD-ROM. Yeah, I want to play the CD-ROM on that old computer. So I thought, great, okay, fair enough. But the other only other way is emulation, which is much more commonsensical, I would think. But he was a bit of a purist. He was a bit crazy, this guy David. But he has a huge, well, I shouldn't say crazy. He's eccentric to the point where he is a collector and he collects a lot, and he likes to play things the authentic way. That's just the way he is, and I get it. Okay, and last and least, no, I shouldn't say that. Last but not least. I want to hear your take on when you got introduced to emulation and your path.
All right. Before that, just acknowledging the people in the chat. We got Sir Marlon, we got Jay Mallows, Sir Ray Q, Richard, Ryan Ortega, and of course Mama Jane. Hi, Mama Jane. Okay. Another message from Sir Ryan here. Who could forget the Neo Geo? The system cost a fortune and still stands today as the most expensive game system that nobody heard, nobody played. No,
well,
somebody heard, but just didn't play or didn't know.
Played.
We were poor. That was the.
Or we were just too poor.
That was the Rolls Royce of video games console at the time. And if you look at inflation, I remember there was a chart showing inflation in consoles. I think the Neo Geo is probably one of the most expensive consoles of all time. It's definitely up there in the top 3. But it was literally a 1-to-1 arcade conversion at home, and that's what they were promising with that system. But I can understand, still not accessible for a lot of people because it's just too expensive for people.
Just buy some. You know what? Just buy some tokens and hit the arcade. That's it. Really, you don't really need the console itself. Just go straight to your local arcade shop, buy a few tokens, play your Neo Geo base games. That's it, really. All right.
That's if
In
you can
my
find it
case,
now. That's the thing.
emulation
Like, a lot of
wise,
stuff is closed down. So that's another problem. And that's why the only way to play them is by emulation if you're going to make it easy. So you have that. But yeah. So Joe, you were going to tell us your story about when you were introduced to emulation. Don't try.
um,
Yeah.
this was back when we had our PC back in early 2000s.
Yeah.
Um, so me and my brother were at the college level at the time, and this is what early 2000. So the PS2 is already out, and we already played the hell out of the PS1,
Mhm.
and it's either getting a PS2 or getting a PC. We chose getting a PC for academic purposes, FAP, you know, and for FAP, and at the and when I saw one, like Sir Joel mentioned about the internet craze at the dawn of the century, I saw one of the forums game. I think it was GameFAQs. They mentioned something about a Tales of Fantasia for the Super Nintendo that got translated. Originally came out of Japan, but for the Super Famicom. And at the time, I've already played Tales of Destiny and Tales of Destiny 2 or Eternia, and I really wanted to play some more JRPGs, and I saw Tales of Fantasia. Mind you, we don't have a PS2, so okay, I was curious. Okay, how do I play Tales of Fantasia? And they said, okay, they said just download this program called ZSNES.
Mhm.
Okay, I downloaded that and then got the ROM of the fan translated Tales of Fantasia. I played that, finished that. I wanted to play some more games because we didn't. Mind you, we didn't have a Super Nintendo as well. But knowing that, oh, I can play some Super Nintendo games on this on a PC. I wasn't even aware that I wasn't even aware of the word emulation or emulator. I just knew the brand of the program Z SNES.
Yeah.
So I got a fan translated Star Ocean one.
Mm.
I got that, and then around this time we took a break from playing console games and focused more on PC games. And then I got I encountered something called the MGBA or the VBA, the MGBA or the Visual Game Boy Advance, and I played Golden Sun 1 and 2 on those.
Amazing games.
For
Amazing.
the first few Yu-Gi-Oh games as well. That's where I learned how to play Yu-Gi-Oh using those emulators.
Yeah.
And then around 2005, uh, that's the time when I've encountered Bleem, the best little emulator ever made. Bleem. Okay. And I'm like, why would I even want this? I said. So I found a bootleg Bleem. Okay, there's a story why it was bootleg. Okay, so I saw a bootleg copy of that. Sir Joel and Sir Jomar would know this. So I saw that one in Recto, of course. I saw a bootleg copy of that CD-ROM in Recto, and I'm like, what? And I'm like, what is this? And it said, oh, you can play PlayStation One titles
Mm.
using this on a PC. And I'm like, why would I even want this?
Mm.
And I remembered, you know how the PlayStation lens can get really rugged.
Yeah.
It can get really problematic over time as you keep on using it. So I'm like, okay, around this time the laser ain't so hot anymore. You tend to put your PlayStation topsy turvy just to just so that your PlayStation One can actually read the disc. And I'm like, okay. I said, if I really wanted to play some PlayStation 1 games, rather than buying another PlayStation 1 or replacing the PS1 lens, maybe I should give this a try. I did. I bought that one, put it on my PC, and I played some PlayStation 1 games. And yeah. Oh, and this bootleg copy, this was already been modded, where you can actually play bootleg copies of PS1 games, because the original Bleem doesn't allow you to do that. You need actual original PlayStation 1 games, region locked, mind you. But the one that I got's already been modded, so they already took out the region locking. It's region free. You can play some backup PS1 games on it, original or bootleg. So yeah, life was good, and I think that was it really in terms of emulation. And we'll talk more about hardware versus emulation gaming in a little while. But up to that point, I stopped right there.
Very interesting story with you. What I found really interesting with yours is that this is really interesting. Is how you mentioned there was a translation patch for Tales of Fantasia, which is a game that we could only ever play or access if you're Japanese and learn new Japanese, and Star Ocean. And this is like in the mid 2000s, right? Or just before 2005 when the patches were released. And well, yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with, I mean, I can totally understand that, because here's a man that we all know is passionate about JRPGs and would like to access these games. And even if he was to buy these games legitimately for the Super Famicom, he couldn't play them because of the language, you know? And this is just another way to play a game. Like anything that's holy is always in, you know, the land of the rising sun. We never get to touch it. And somebody has gone out their way to make a fan translation patch for free. You know, he's done this patch for free. He's not asking for money. And all these patches are available on this wonderful website called romhacking.net. Definitely a shout out for that. And you can download them. And if you have the ROM legitimately, just let's say your backup, you can patch them and you can play them in English for the first time. And this is a revolutionary thing that happened in the ROM community. You know, to be able to play games that are locked in a certain region, which had a certain language you couldn't like read or understand, but you could still now play them in English. Outstanding. And I did something like this, like you yourself, not long ago. I was a huge Phoenix Wright fan. Okay, still am. Okay, the third game in the series, because they were originally Game Boy Advance games, but they're all in Japanese. Yeah, but I downloaded the patch for the third game, which was on the Game Boy Advance, just to play it, see what it was like. Because I was going to buy the game anyway. So Capcom already had my money when it would come out on DS, but I wanted to play it and explore it. And it's just another way to sort of try and appreciate a game. And it's not to say you're not ever going to buy the game, not legitimately going to buy it. Such as yourself, Joe. He actually bought a copy of Tales of Fantasia for me on the Game Boy Advance. But it finally got a localized port years later. But because Sir Joe played that game and he fell in love with it, that translation patch made him want to buy that game. So actually, that's actually a really profound story, that you can play games on emulation, experience them, and then buy them later on. But with you, it's such a unique thing, because Star Ocean is obviously still only available in Japan. I don't know, has it had a localized port on Super Nintendo? Has that been localized? I don't know. I don't think it has. Which is a shame.
No, unless of course unless you buy the PSP version, but that's already been repackaged in a way. But like
Yeah.
like an actual localized as Star Ocean one, no, not really.
No, so I think RPG One did a translation patch of Star Ocean. Again, that's a hard game. So you can't, again, with a game like, I think there are two games on Super Nintendo. There's a bit of trivia for you guys, useless information, but you might as well know it. Those two cartridges had a special chip in there, an enhancement chip, that allowed the graphics of the games to unlock and unzip themselves as you played the game. Those games were actually very hard to copy and emulate. And you had to do, the person who ripped the ROM had to get patches on that ROM before you could even play it. So there's a lot of engineering that had to go on behind the scenes to get it to work. And to then patch Star Ocean with a translation patch, that was something else. So a lot of work has gone on behind the scenes with these people who are emulating these games and ripping the ROMs and getting them down PC. But again, great way to play games that are locked in Japan with the translation patches. That's a very interesting point that you've raised, Jose, with your experiences. So thank you for sharing that. What was this? We've got a comment here. Not English fan translated pack from ROM hacking. Also had any added features, ROM game increase anything more. So yeah, you have not just translation patches are available on ROM hacking. You have other quality of life improvements you can patch on these games of yesterday, like VRAM and things like that. Better graphics and better sound and things like that. So there's a lot more to ROM hacking.net than translation patches. I use it predominantly for translation patches, but you have ROM hacks for other things as well, which I'm not going to delve into because would be diverging from the subject. Right, so this is off. We've kicked it off. We know what emulation is. We've all talked about what we used to emulate back in the day and how we were introduced to it and what we did for it. So then we move on to the third stanza of this little topic, which is what consoles can be successfully emulated well to a decent standard, and what are the limitations of emulations as a result of this? So this is really interesting because it all depends on what kind of computer you have and how powerful it is. Obviously, back in the early 2000s, like who here had a dedicated graphics card in their PC? Only people who were seriously into gaming and really into that. Now, me, I had a Time computer system made by Time Computers, which don't exist anymore. Nana Nimoy did the advert for it anyway. So this computer had an AMD K6 graphic, not an K6 graphics card, not a AMD Athlon, which was the top of the line there that could compete with Pentium 2 and 3. This was like quite a basic system, but it was still powerful enough to run Sega Mega Drive and Super Nintendo. But say if I was to try something more advanced with 3D graphics, like putting Bleem on it, like PlayStation, it would struggle. It's only with my computer after that, which had shared graphics and all sorts of things, could we do that. So, I think with today's standards, there's a lot we can emulate now. Back then, originally, we couldn't. Now we can emulate with a lot of powerful computers that will allow us to emulate the 5th generation and 6th generation of video consoles to much extent. So, if you're emulating 8-bit stuff, you could have a computer from the late 90s, early 2000s that can easily emulate an Atari 2600 or a NES or a Master System with ease. And even Mega Drive and SNES, you'd have no problem with 16-bit. 16-bit emulation is at its pinnacle, to be honest. And the only real differences, between that and original hardware is negligible, I find, from my point of view. You tell me I'm wrong, but the only way you can sort of make that judgment is if you actually had the original hardware to compare it with. So I'd like to say that, look, in terms of successful emulation, you're fine with the 16-bit consoles. In terms of handhelds, you're also fine up all the way until Game Boy Advance. They'll run at 60 frames a second. That's what I tend to find to be fine, and they emulate well. Now, when you get to 32-bit territory, providing you have a decent computer, which you will do now, you should be able to run PlayStation games with ease. Yeah, the PS1 was a very simple system, which wasn't overly engineered like its contemporaries at the time. It's only when you get to Sega Saturn you need to have something very powerful to run that, and you can emulate a Saturn successfully now for the most part, but you do need a powerful computer. N64 emulation is still, in my opinion, not there. I don't think it's good enough, and that's to do with the fact of the way N64 emulation is. When we go beyond that with Dreamcast, providing you have a dedicated GPU on your computer that's over 2 gigs of memory, you can run Dreamcast, you can run PlayStation as well. And then obviously PlayStation 2, and obviously with Xbox, and when you get to those realms, it's not a case of can you emulate it, it's a case of why would you want to, because the games have so much, the amount of memory it takes to download the game onto your hard drive, and how cheap the games are for these platforms now. You might as well just buy the game and get a platform and play it that way now, because they're so cheap to do. So that's what I would say if you're going to play those games via that means. But I would say that, anything 16-bit. So if you're like me, who loves a 16-bit era, you're laughing because any computer can run it. And we're just talking PCs here now. Now we have loads of emulation devices you can get, such as the Ambient systems and whatnot, and they can run a whole number of these devices now. So there's actually a lot of systems that run flawlessly. I would only personally say, from my experience, N64 is where the barrier is, and that's to do with just the way the hardware works, and Saturn to some extent. I'll say Saturn to some extent, but it depends on just how powerful the devices you're running can play Saturn games. But you would need a powerful computer to emulate Saturn. But these days people just typically mod their Saturns now if they want to play Saturn games, because it's just much more affordable. If you better than collecting Saturn games, you have that. This Nintendo ninjas might sense this. It's one of these things that I'm not that bothered about, to be honest, because I just want to be very clear here. We're not promoting this sort of stuff. We're just saying this sort of stuff exists. There are ways that you can do these things. So yeah, that's one thing I've noticed. I mean, what about you guys in the panel? I mean, what sort of limitations of emulation have you had when you were emulating? Not in the early days, but even now, what sort of limitations do you have when it comes to emulating certain games? Starting with you, Miss I, what limitations do you have?
I would say, since meeting you, Sir Viraj and Sir Dan, I found difficulty in emulating some Sega consoles. I would say I would rather play those Sega games embedded on websites, because I found it difficult to run the available Sega emulators that we have now. Or maybe I'm just not too adept in making some of those emulators work.
Which Sega game? What systems are we talking now? I can understand if you're saying Saturn and Dreamcast. I get that completely, but Mega Drive should be easy. No, you having issues with Mega Drive?
I would say Saturn.
Saturn, yeah, that's because of the way the hardware is. You're not doing anything wrong. It's just because the Saturn is an overcomplicated piece of hardware. It has 2 dedicated graphics processors in there, 1 dedicated soundboard, and there's a number of microprocessors. So even me, I've got I use a Surface Book 2. I'll barely get a game running at 3 frames a second if I'm lucky, and that's just the way the Saturn is. I need a more powerful computer. That's all it really is. And Saturn is just a pain to emulate. That's the truth.
Oh, I thought I was a dum dum because I couldn't get the games running.
Saturn like with N64 is just hard to emulate properly. Like N64, you'll have more luck with, but even when you look at certain games, they're missing assets. They don't run properly. They're choppy. It's just the way that they buffered into the system and the way that they run. It's just the way that the hardware was, and it's just difficult to emulate using PC. So you're not doing anything wrong with Saturn. Saturn is just very, very hard to emulate. More harder than Dreamcast. You know, more luck emulating Dreamcast, because that was when Sega switched, and Sega was the one that led this charge from where Saturn and N64 failed. Sega realized, okay, we need to make it more simpler to make a system to make. Because again, even those native pieces of hardware, they were hard to make games for the developers. Because if you've got a platform with 2 VDU chips, what do we use? What are they used for? How do we program a game around all this stuff? It's difficult. Sega with the Dreamcast, they said, okay, we'll have 1 dedicated GPU. And ever since that day, ever since the 6th generation, that kicked off the 6th generation, and that's why it's easy to emulate 6th generation systems, because they will have 1 dedicated GPU that the games were programmed around. And when we look at the N64, which had a number of different microprocessors, which had different attributes and different assets that would work with a certain game, which is why you have 2 dedicated N64 emulators, Mupen and Glupen, and one will work better with certain games and one will work better with other games. So you have a very complex piece of hardware that you've got to emulate, because just the way that the board was made, it has just different chips which use different levels of power as well. Same with Saturn, different power settings for different games, and that's why it's not a one-size-fits-all, and that's what an emulator tries to do. And that's basically me explaining in layman's terms. You have done nothing wrong. The emulator isn't the best in the world, and even I have tried to emulate Saturn on this Mega Drive Mini, and I thought, my heart sunk a bit when I'm playing Bug 3D, but I kind of expected it when the little animal was running at 1 frame a second. The bug's trying to move at 1 frame a second. It happens, and even there's a lot more I could waffle on about, but yes, you are going to have a limitation with Saturn and N64 in the way it plays, in my opinion. So you've done
That's
nothing
just
wrong.
because just for example, I think I've mentioned before Dynamite Deca or Die Hard arcade game.
Yeah,
That one because I enjoyed playing that on the arcade, and when I tried to play it on, sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce Mame or Meme, it runs okay, but there is no background music. But when I play it on the Sega Saturn emulator, there's this separate folder for the music, and I'm trying to comprehend what am I supposed to do with this music
So
folder,
what
and
you have to do, yeah.
I
So
really
when
don't know
you
what to do.
based CD based things, you have to fuse
Yes.
the B and the Q file together, so then it becomes one ROM. And I know with PlayStation, I use something called CHD Man, and that basically compresses the ROM, but also puts the sound and the the game ROM file together, so they all work at the same time. And same sort of thing with Saturn. But even once you've done that, and when you've noticed
Yes.
even on the game without the sound, you notice that it's running at such a slow frame rate. What's the point in playing it? Because the sound's going to lag as well as the picture. So it's pointless. Saturn emulation, you need to have a powerful computer to do it. That's basically it, or a powerful device that will run it. And they do exist. You just got to spend money on it, sadly. And that's why a lot of people are saying they need to start porting Saturn games to the Switch and other systems so it can have another life. And Dynamite Deca, recently I read an article how people really want to play Die Hard arcade on
Yes.
a newer system. And what bothers me is how Sega don't port these games on newer systems, because people would love to play them. Forget emulation; people just really love to play the games on the Saturn again. On new,
Indeed.
and they should. They're sitting on a gold mine there. But the issue with Sega as well is Panzer Dragoon Saga, which is a role-playing game, one of the most expensive role-playing games on the Saturn, if not the most expensive. I think it's 3 or 4 discs long. They lost the source code for it. So it's going to be very difficult. They'd have to start from scratch and look at the game and do it piece by piece and report it. So a lot of things have gone missing in that era, and that's really sad. But I understand. So yes, Miss I, the limitations is Sega Saturn, which we've discovered here with you because you've tried it.
Yeah.
Very sharing your experience with us here on the board, because you're not alone. So don't feel like you've done anything wrong. You've done nothing wrong. You're not alone.
I'm glad I'm not alone.
I tinkered with Saturn for ages, scratching my head, and I realized I need something more powerful. I need something with some power, you know?
Yes.
That. All right, so moving to Sir Joel, what limitations have you had with emulations, or what do you think emulates well, or whatever?
Well, I've come to the point where the limitations are based purely on the power of the PC that I'm currently wielding.
Yeah.
So because of the fact that the PC that I have right now, my laptop, it's not brand new. I've had it since 2021, but it's capable of running all the way up to PS3 games emulated. That in itself is mind-blowing already, because I do remember getting the PlayStation 3 long ago when it first launched at $600, and it was like, man, this is the pinnacle of gaming already.
Yeah.
And now I am running PlayStation 3 games on my desktop computer. So overall, I see it as the limitations are power, price, portability. Pick two. It's either power and price but no portability, portability and price but no power. It's the three: portability, power, price. So those three things are the limitations of emulation right now. I have a PC that can handle a PS3 emulation, but I can't bring it along wherever I want to go. I have my handheld emulators. I might as well show them right now. I have my let's see, let's do the Anbernic RG35XX, which is an approximation. There you go. JDM is also showing off his hardware. which is an approximation of the GBA, which is I have one that is reshelled. So this one actually is good enough to handle everything up to Sega Saturn, if I remember correct. Not Saturn. The one before that, I completely forgot. It might be Saturn. I just forget. It's just, maybe Dreamcast, but not as strong as it can possibly be. It can handle PS1 games comfortably. But yeah.
Because it's weird how though they are, because it's usually PS1 and then it jumps to Dreamcast, but Saturn has problems. It's weird how the middling bit of that fifth generation, and it really does annoy me when that happens. But that's so cool. I've got a PAL Kiddie. I haven't got it with me, the V90, and that will go up to PS1. But even that has problems with PS1.
Yes,
but that's
exactly.
I'm happy with just 16-bit on the go, because I find video games to be more appropriate in handheld form to take with me. It's easy for me to pick up and play. I don't like looking at 3D on a small screen. It messes with my eyes. I'd rather
and of course, getting into handheld portability. Of course, the PSP. This can handle everything up to PS1. You hack it. You what do you call that, Raj? You soft mod it, and it'll run most anything in your pocket. This is the PSP Go in particular. I like this model for the fact that it easily slips into my vest pocket. Not a problem there, right there. Price, portability, and power. This sacrifices, in terms of power, battery power, battery life. This only runs about 2.5 hours. I'd say 2.5 hours, max 3. Now, if we want to go a little bit more powerful, there's always the Steam Deck. You have the Steam Deck, which will emulate everything up to PS2. So this one will run RetroArch games all the way up to PS2. And what you are sacrificing on this one is that I'm going to have a hell of a time shoving this into my vest pocket. I can't. So portability, I can bring this along with me, but it's not as easy. And of course, in terms of traveling, the good old cell phone. The good old cell phone will allow you to run a lot of emulated games. Just download RetroArch on it. Or if you want to go a little bit easier on my old eyes, there's always the Android, Kindle Fire tablet, which you can download RetroArch on it too. You can just connect a Bluetooth controller to it. So overall, that is the limitation. But of course, there is such a thing as a dedicated emulation machine, which is a Pandora's Box. This one runs Pandora's Box arcade games with its own dedicated screen, which you can connect to a television. So this one, $70 off of Amazon, like you said, they are easily gotten off of third-party sites. But generally, the idea is those three things: price, power, portability. Those three things. Pick two. Those are what you run into when it comes to limitations with emulation. You have to sacrifice either the power, which you cannot run up to a certain level, the power as to the battery life, portability. You can't shove it into your vest pocket, or price. You are either paying an exorbitant price to emulate a certain machine. Or you just can't do it because of the limitations of the hardware that you have. So that is the 3-point limitation that I see when it comes to emulation.
That's really, really, really profoundly put. One extra thing I might want to add to your three P's, I'm being cheeky doing this, is the letter M, which is memory as well. You mentioned PlayStation 3, and then my eyes lit up and thinking, okay, smart ass, okay, hot shot. Pop quiz, hot shot. How much memory is one PS3 game on average, and how much memory would you also need on that computer? It's good having the power, but you need the memory. You need the memory to store the thing as well. And the more memory you have on this thing, the more power you'll need. And my friend Robert said the best way to sort of play PS3 games, even though you can do it on PC, is just modding a PS3 and just downloading the games on that and have it running through that, because your PC will just take so much space. So again, it depends on the individual. And it's to do with the sacrifice. If you're happy to spend the money on a powerful computer to do this, great. But again, with PlayStation 3, you sacrifice in portability. But then PS3 was never a portable system anyway. But I can see years from now, you'll be able to
Years
play
from now, I imagine maybe I'd give it maybe 5 years from now down the line, somebody will have a machine that will emulate PS3.
It's really COVID has really damaged memory and driving those costs down of flash memory. And I purchased a lot of flash memory. And what has really annoyed me is how expensive a terabyte still is now. And I would have thought by now we'd have like 4 terabytes at the price of a terabyte. But now, because of the way things have gone, that's just due to memory and storage. Obviously, processing power and computer technology has just stagnated because of COVID. So we're going to be back a few years, but I think in time we will. It will happen. We just got to wait longer. So yeah, that is annoying. But you raised some very, very profound, important points. And I thank you for showing us your handheld collection of emulation devices. And yes, there are some of it's Chinesium. Yeah, fair enough, but it works. You know, there's a lot of great emulation devices out there. I bought one. Sadly, I should have brought it with me. It's bloody downstairs. I don't want to go up and pick it up now. It's a Power Kitty V90. It's about the same, similar sort of thing. But I think the Ambinic stuff is better personally, even though I don't own it. I know they're better. And they've even done a device which is like a Genesis, but in a handheld, and it's got that Batarang look. They do so many different handhelds for different gamers or people who like it. Now, I like the Genesis one because it's got that 6-button layout. So again, have you played with it? So some great points you've raised there in regards to limitations and what you have to sacrifice to get something. All right, so over to you, JDM. What sort of limitations have you faced? And yeah, go for it.
For me, it's not. I don't see it as a limitation, but sometimes when you're trying to emulate your games on an emulator, especially if you have a very powerful system, sometimes the games are not in sync because because of you have so much power to play this emulator that the game runs so fast, and even if you put like a throttle or something like that, it won't even sync with the music. Like the graphics and the in-game audio are not syncing, and sometimes the audio is too fast or too loud. I think that's the limitation of using an emulator. But since you already have a lot of emulators right now, especially for the PS1, is which I think is the best emulated console or system so far, because you now have, we started from Blim, then we had the EPSXE, and then now we have what they call this, the dock station, which is much more powerful and very accurate PS1 emulator.
That's correct. It's. I would say. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut into this, but I would say, because we all know the PlayStation Classic Mini came out a few years ago, and one of the biggest controversies of Sony releasing this device is that it wasn't any good in terms of its own emulation, how it had PAL and NTSC ROMs on there, and it just about passed in the way that it would play. But DuckStation is a far superior emulator to that when it just came out afterwards. And
Yes.
And Sony didn't even make their own emulator; they used somebody else's emulator for it, which is another thing as well. Whereas, Sega and Nintendo worked with people to emulate their games, which is on their mini systems. But it was, DuckStation is a huge leap when it comes to PlayStation 1 emulation. If, for those of you listening thinking, I tried Bleemer and I didn't enjoy it, or I tried those older PlayStation emulators and it wasn't quite like the original experience, which I totally get, DuckStation is the one. It's the one. And that to me covers pretty much all the bases. There's not much in it. And you raise a very, very interesting point about how the sound and the images can be off. And that is a problem with emulation and various systems when we're talking about the 5th and 6th generation, when things don't quite work as well as they should do. And that can be off-putting if you remember playing the original game. I remember how I emulate is I'll talk about it in a bit, which is modding the minis. And when I thought it's a game called Driver, it's by a company called Reflections, where you drive this car, and I noticed it was a bit off, and that was because I was using the stock emulator of this device. But when I changed the emulator around, it's night and day difference. You'll see it. So Yeah, but go on, carry on, JDM. Were you finished with your point? I cut you off.
And I think DuckStation was the first PlayStation emulator that can already render up to 4K resolution if you have
You can, yeah. So
dedicated graphics. So it looks really cool.
it looks better than
Imagine,
PlayStation.
imagine playing a PlayStation game and the graphic is like PS2 or PS3 quality. It really
Yeah,
looks cool. It's like a different experience all along.
I would say it's a superior experience. Call me crazy. I know it's
Mm-hmm.
heresy, but I'll say it's a superior. They've actually upgraded the experience of playing PlayStation with DuckStation. But other than the stupid name DuckStation, is the better. What you call an emulator DuckStation is about as lewd as Nesticle. But it works and that's great and that's the key thing. But yeah, good shout. That's a limitation. It is annoying when you try and emulate a game and you think, oh, it's not quite the original, so you get put off. Some people stick with it and think, okay, at least I get to play the game and tour it. But playing.
Try playing. What's that game? Parappa the Rapper, using an emulator with it.
Oh, yeah, that music game where you got to push the buttons and
You won't even. I don't think you even pass the first stage with the that onion master with the kung fu moves.
Yeah.
I don't think you get past that.
Oh well, it is what it is. Right, interesting points there. Right, who's left to have their discussion about it? It's you, Jose, isn't it? You're the last one. What your limitations were, and what you think was successful, what worked for you, and what doesn't work.
Well, my limitation before used to be like which emulators to use. There's some that are good, some that are bad. But like within the last few years, I found out about RetroArch, and it's kind of just like it has like all these different cores for different systems, and that's been working fine for me. I've been able to run anything from Atari all the way to Dreamcast, no problem on my PC. So the only real limitation is space.
Right, memory.
Yeah. So I have a dedicated hard drive for said games.
You need one, yeah.
And
so there's your price. So you got to spend money on this thing.
Yeah.
There's your price and memory, yeah.
Yeah, so I have like full libraries of a bunch of systems, so they're taking up a lot of space on this hard drive.
Yeah, I know. I totally understand. That's fair enough. I get it. Short and sweet. Memory. That's what it is. But then you can always delete some games. No, we can't delete games. We're a hoarder. We got to have all of it, right?
Yeah, we got. What if I want to play that one game? No.
I had an epiphany, and I want to play that particular game at this particular point in time. I wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning thinking, no, I want to play this game now. That could happen.
Yeah.
With that, yeah, we're like that. So yeah. No, but I can totally understand what you mean in terms of limitations. So I'll go next, and I'll let Joe finish. So my limitations, and this is recently, and obviously all of what you said is a limitation that affects me. But so I like to mod the Mini. This is a Mega Drive Mini. This is a way this is the way I emulate, which is a legitimate way, okay, of playing games via emulation. Sega launched this back in 2019. This is the Mega Drive. There's a Genesis region. They had one for every region. They even had an Asia region model for you in the Philippines that came out in 2019. That's actually the best version if you can get your hands on it, because it's got an interesting array of games. 42 games preloaded. Great. The limitations on, and this is an interesting point I want to raise that hasn't been raised, the limitations of emulation on this device. Now, one of the critiques it got was the sound emulation wasn't all there, and that's a very tricky thing to emulate, and I'll touch on that. And lag. Yeah? Lag in terms of input lag. And there's about 7 frames of lag on this particular emulation device. I can't see it because as far as I'm concerned, it's good enough. Okay? But you are going to get a degree of lag on this. And another thing that I've done, which makes my Mini superior than what it already is it has this lovely little device thing. Here it is. There's the USB there. And this is to do with memory. Okay? Now, That's 64 gigabytes in the palm of my hand. This is the entire, and this is the most amazing thing. All those cartridges, it's all in here. All of that memory is in here. This is basically every Sega Mega Drive, every 32X, every Sega CD, every Master System, Game Gear, and the SG-1000 for the Japan region of Sega. In that, it's all in that, and that's amazing.
Honestly, if you had told me that, college me that, the fact that you could carry around your entire library in that flash drive in your pocket, it would have blown my mind. Totally.
Would have done all those years ago. Would have blown your mind, but you have it there. But even modding this had its limitations when I was playing with it. So I mentioned how Sega Saturn. What I've done once I've done up to 32X, I tried Saturn, and even though 32X also has its limitations on this, and I'll touch on that, but Saturn, oh my gosh, it's got its issues. It will run out of frame a second because of just the way it is. You can, strangely enough, run Dreamcast on this, but the emulation isn't a smooth thing. It's not what JDM said about with the frame rate and the sound and how it can be a bit out with it. You can play Dreamcast. It's generally all right, but when you notice it, it totally ruins your experience. So I didn't bother putting Dreamcast on here. And the reason Dreamcast can be emulated more successfully is because it had that dedicated GPU as a piece of hardware, whereas the Saturn and N64 didn't. I'm actually trying to try and repair it today after this podcast. There's one game. 32X has its emulation issues, but it's still good enough. There's one game called Colbury. I don't know if you've ever heard of this game called Colbury on the 32X. You probably haven't. It was developed by a company called Nova Trade, who did Echo the Dolphin and Amoeba Entertainment, and it crashes. I play the game and it crashes 10 minutes in the emulator, and it just boots me back to the main screen. I'm like, what's going on? So I spoke to the people in the mod hub and I said, what's going on? People who do the same thing I do pretty much. And go, yeah, you need to expand the VRAM in the emulator. You need to put an extreme, you need to do this, you need to do that. So I'm going to do some tinkering just to see if I can get that game working without crashing. So certain games, for whatever miscellaneous reasons, will crash on certain emulators. I think because Colbury's it's a shoot 'em up where you play as a hummingbird. And there's a lot of assets and it uses a lot of color. And it does push the 32X's sort of color palette. So I'm going to see if I can try it. So that's my limitation. It's that bloody one game that doesn't work on a mini. I've got everything running, all 2020 games, that one game. It's always a bloody one. And it just infuriates me because when I go and sell this build, I have to tell everybody, look, you're going to notice that game's going to crash after 10 minutes. Otherwise, it's flawless. And this is obviously my SNES Classic Mini. Again, same sort of deal. A legitimate. This is actually, I think it's the most popular selling mini console of all time. I think it sold over 2 million units worldwide or something like that. And again, they did a Famicom, Super Famicom, the ugly American version, which I'm sure some of you have. And this is the European PAL version. 21 games. Is the emulator good on this? Yes. Yes, it's a really good emulator. The Clover Canoe emulator on the SNES Mini is an amazing emulator. Well, emulate pretty much all the games you load on it. There's only a few which I have to use the RetroArch emulator to run on here. But the vast majority of games, you'll be fine with this baby. And of course, I've modded the hell out of this. It's over 5,000. Because I put the NES on here as well, the NES Mini stuff and the NES console. And the NES emulator is also great with the NES Mini, the Catchy emulator. Great emulator on this. I think the lag on this was like 3 to 4 frames, so it's not even that much lag. So yeah, mini consoles, that's how I like to emulate. But the limitations I find is getting certain systems to emulate. Again, I tried N64 on this, and that again goes back to the limitations I say with Saturn. Again, I can emulate the first party games well with Nintendo 64. So we're talking Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, and all that stuff. GoldenEye to some extent. Some of the Conker's Bad Fur Day has an odd glitch. The issue I have is with the third party stuff for Nintendo 64, and that's when certain assets don't appear, or you've got glitches, and it just totally ruins your experience. So Castlevania 64 I have problems with. Mega Man Legends I have problems with. You think, well, Mega Man Legends sucks, it doesn't matter. But what if I want to play that game? So you're going to have, you're going to have issues with it. Or Earthworm Jim 3D, what if I want to play? What if I want to torture myself and play Superman 64? Strangely enough, that game works fine on this, but that's another issue. But I took N64 off it because if it's not 100% working, what's the point in having it on a build? So, there are so many of these plug and play minis that I play on, but those are sort of my limitations. What about you, Sir Joe? I know you must have some limitations with emulations, and what are your thoughts on what runs well and what doesn't run well for you? Or what issues have you had?
just to piggyback on what Sir Joel mentioned earlier, to me, it's all about what's the technological capability of your hardware to run the emulation software
Mm,
at the time. What I forgot to mention earlier regarding my ZSNES
yes.
experience, especially when playing Tales of Fantasia and Star Ocean 1. And with one of the main reasons why those games were notorious being emulated is that because, like Sir Verge mentioned, because of that special chip. Okay, and the earlier releases of the ZSNES and even the what's the other one? The SNES
There's
FX,
9X. There's 9X
something
is the
like
other.
that. So uh, they're still having some difficulty running those
Mm.
back in the early 2000s. And aside from that one, and of course the hardware capability of your device as well. When I first played Tales of Fantasia, it was fucking slow. Oh my god, it was so slow.
Yeah, it was.
Like
Yeah.
um and I'm not even sure if it's if I'm not if I don't have the required graphics card. I'm not sure, maybe it's just the unhealthy amount of porn in there that I have in my PC, or maybe or may- or maybe it's just the
Yeah.
actual software itself.
It was the
Maybe
emulation.
it's a combination of three. And I had to do a lot of stuff. Like I read a few forum entries, and they said, adjusting the sound, decreasing the kilohertz of the sound so that it doesn't take too much processing power, so it runs faster. Even adjusting the frame rate, even skip the frame skipping, right?
Yes, but
So
you
so you can
shouldn't have to do that.
imagine me. Uh, you, I'm playing Tales of Fantasia, and even Star Ocean, especially during combat. It's like watching those still pictures. Like, so I'm running around like this, and then they're already here. Then they're already there. There's no fluidity
Yeah,
in their
and the
movement because you're frame
thing,
skipping all the time.
you
You
can't
know what
play a
I
game that way.
mean?
It's crazy. Like
And
the only time I played a game with frame skip was Pokemon Gold when I couldn't wait for my character to walk. I just thought, let's go and let's battle some Pokemon. Let's get this done quickly. And that's the best way of emulating Pokemon is that you can just get the battles done over and done. You're not waiting for those frames. But you can't play a
yeah,
game like Tales of Fantasia with frame skip, and you can't. You want to experience that music, you want to experience that adventure, and it just totally ruins your experience. And it's not no, you've done nothing wrong. Early days of SNES emulation, because the SNES was actually a slow console and it was a complex system in terms of they didn't use a modern processor. So,
and
it was
so
most games
uh,
in the old
and
languages,
even
not
with
C.
the MGBA and the VBA,
Yeah,
when in those Yu-Gi-Oh games, I had to do the same thing. I At that time I was 100% sure it's just my device.
yeah,
It's very outdated. We really needed to, at least get a graphics card in there, but we didn't
yeah.
have the money at the time
Yeah, it's
because
expensive.
the main purpose of the PC to begin with was, for academic
Well,
purposes or
yeah,
fab. It wasn't meant for us to play video games on it. All right.
yeah.
So VBA, MGBA, even the no cache GBA,
Oh, bless
I
you.
had to do the same thing. Lower the frame skipping and
Mm,
lowering down or even disabling the audio itself, just so that I can play my games. Uh, Not even I can play my games somewhat play up, make
yeah.
it them playable, if that's the right term for it. Okay.
Mm,
uh I remember playing Angelic Layer
right.
for the GBA, and that's a rhythm fighting game. Really, can you imagine a rhythm fighting game when you are frame skipping all the time?
Well, yeah. I
So
mean, that's not
so
playable. I
so
mean,
I it's like I had to adjust my own timing just
Yeah.
so that I can follow so I can press the right buttons at the same time as the arrows getting there, just so that
what
I
do
can
people
hit
Angel?
perfectly.
Jaw demonstrates gamer reflexes. If
So,
something is amiss, our reflexes adjust to it. You know, this
so
frame
Oh yeah,
skip
I
is
did.
causing a
Yeah.
problem. Our
what's this
reflexes
name?
adjust to the frame skip. We don't
What's this
complain. We adjust.
thing that you're talking about? Angel what? Angel.
Angelic Layer. It's a Japanese. It was a Japanese anime manga, and then got a video game for it for the Game Boy Advance.
I've not
But
heard of that.
I watched the thing. I fell in love with it, and I saw a game for it. Japanese only, unfortunately. So I played that on the emulator GB on the Game Boy Advance.
Okay. Is
Like
it playable in English?
like I mentioned, frame skipping,
Is it,
audio adjusting. But I was still able to play it. I was able
yeah.
to adjust despite the frame skipping. So yeah, so like I mentioned, so it still depends on the version or the revision of the software and the actual hardware that you are using to play the games on that particular emulator.
Hmm. Oh, okay. All right. That's very good. Very interesting. Very interesting that you made those points there. Yeah, with the SNES and Z SNES and SNES 9X, they needed a lot of work. Back in 2005, I hacked the first PSP, and I did put SNES and Mega Drive games as you do on there. No, I did that. So what if I did? Okay, like the PSP. Like, let me tell you something. In my defense, yeah, when the PSP came out, it was rubbish. It had no good games on it. I had one game called Def Junior, and it took so long for good games to come out. Yeah, and even that game hurt my eyes. And so I hacked it. I got the memory stick in there, I played Fantasy Star 4 on my PSP, and then somebody saw me at work saying, "Hang about, this is a brand new console. You've hacked it to play 16-bit games. What is wrong with you? It's capable of graphics that could do like a PS2 quality, and you're playing a 16-bit Sega game on it." But let me just get to the point. The Mega Drive games would still need to be overclocked to a certain level to even emulate on that device, strangely enough. I had to overclock my PSP from 222 megahertz to 333 when I was back when I was a proper pro hacker. And when I put the SNES on it, it didn't matter how much I overclocked it; it would still run slower on that device. And it's just to do with the way the emulators were for the time for working on certain devices, and it needed to have a dedicated PC at the time. You know, even a handheld like a PSP wouldn't run it because it's the way that it spoke to the emulator. There's nothing you did wrong. You did the best you could do, and you got another computer. To be honest, we've all evolved from that. I mean, you bloody own Tales of Fantasia on GBA if you want to play it now, but that was just the status quo back in the day. You just had what you had. You didn't, and you did the best you could with what you got. So there's no shame in that. I mean, the only shame is that your computer had loads of porn, and you should have deleted the porn because that would displease the Lord. Okay, and that you shouldn't have that. But that's another thing altogether. There's a child here, so I can't talk about this thing. We can see that you turned up, so we can't talk about this sort of stuff. But yeah, hello, little girl. How are you? All right. So, okay, right. Okay, so we move on to the next point. So we talk about limitations. So now we're going to talk about, and this links to the other one, which is original hardware versus emulation, and what you've noticed from owning original hardware and playing games on the hardware, and where emulation is a benefit and where it is a failure. So this is actually a big discussion we're going to have now. When I first started emulating, as I mentioned, it's Sega Mega Drive. That was my favorite console, and that's what I wanted to play. And again, like with official emulation devices like this, they have their limitations. I mentioned the sound, which I'm going to talk about now. Now, the Sega Mega Drive had a Yamaha YM2612 sound chip in there, which was like a really top-end sound chip at the time and a really good end synth sound. And I noticed whenever playing games on it, Rocket Knight Adventures is the game I'll use to refer to, is I love the sound in that game. That has an amazing soundtrack. And it used to kick, the bass used to be there. One thing I noticed is when you pause the game, because it's an analog system, the sound would continue to flow out the TV. It would be like boom, and then that last note would then end, sort of thing. When you're emulating, it stops instantly when you press the pause button. Also, you got more bass on the original Mega Drive because of the way that the actual hardware has on the chip has in its original hardware. This thing, not as much bass. Okay, there is another emulator. So the stock emulator on this is made by a company called M2, which are really, really good at porting Mega Drive games, but the sound needed a bit more work. When I put RetroArch on this thing and put Genesis Plus GX, which is the emulator, which I'd recommend, the sound was vastly improved, and it's closer to the standard of the Mega Drive, but it doesn't quite match it. So you're going to mix these little things in terms of sound emulation. In terms of the way the game plays and input, again, I mentioned how there's a degree of lag, and you notice it when playing Contra or games like that where you need to be responsive. I think a real gamer would actually adjust to the lag, and you'll get used to it. It's not unplayable, it's not broken, but you'll notice it from playing the original. So that's something I noticed when playing on original hardware Mega Drive to this, an emulation device, or even on PC. And again, same sort of thing with Super Nintendo. I noticed the Super FX games and games which had enhancement chips play obviously better on the actual hardware to emulation. You're going to have when you're building patches and patching, you're going to notice there's going to be something there. But emulation for Super Nintendo has come a long way, and in my opinion, it's still good enough. We mentioned original hardware from PlayStation. Now with emulation with DuckStation, as I said earlier, is better than original PlayStation in my opinion. Okay, and someone will say, "No, you're wrong, Viraj, you're wrong," and there will be those purists out there, but you have that. You know, and I will always say, like, I haven't experienced a good Saturn emulator, so I play on Sega Saturn, and that's limitations. I just play Sega Saturn, and I'll play Dreamcast on Dreamcast, and anything 5th or 6th generation, I'll probably make an attempt at playing it on the original hardware. Probably and that's only because of the limitations of memory on my computer, and because I'm at an age now where I can afford those cheap PS2 games, and it's just not worth the hassle of going through it. I can afford it, and at the point where I can actually buy a game and think, well, when I'm done with it, I can just sell it on and make more money than what I paid. That's because the price of these things are going up. I look at physical medium as an investment, you know, and I do that now. And games are so cheap now for these 5th and 6th gen consoles, 6th gen in particular. It's all right. Apart from GameCube, that's a different thing. But there's a Wii U that I've got I'm looking at my Wii U now, and I can mod that and have every GameCube game and Wii game and Wii U game on it if I wanted to. So if I really care about playing old Nintendo, which I don't really, I think Nintendo games, as great as they are, they're a game you play once, and I don't ever want to play them again because
if I can interject, since we're talking about the PS1, and this will run incongruent to the next subtopic.
Yeah.
So we talked about Bleem, which was the PS1 emulator released for the Windows. There's one before it. That's the Connectix video game station. This Connectix VGS, originally made for the Apple Mac, and this one came out first before the Bleem. And the story was, after they got an encounter with Sony, with all of the legal troubles, suing them for obvious reasons. Connectix VGS, being the big company that they are, because you know they're sided with Apple, right? They won the case against Sony because Sony couldn't win. They couldn't have their way legally. The next best thing that they could have done was just buy the company out, which they did. So they bought Connectix and all of the rights with their Connectix VGS emulator. So all of the employees, well, most of them anyway, most of the employees of that company worked for Sony, and that is why we have the PS1 backwards compatibility for the PS2, and after that for the PS3. They use the same source code so that you can play PS1 on your PS2 and in your PS3. And then, of course, Bleem. Unfortunately, with Bleem, they were only a small startup company. They didn't have enough money to fight Sony. Eventually, they had to give up. So only 2 years of their exposure, they had to close shop. So that's it.
Then what goes on the internet stays on the internet as well. That's another thing. So whilst they couldn't continue developing the emulator, it's out there now, isn't it? So the damage is done.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, It's interesting what happened with Connectex and Bleem, and I learned this because I rewatched Norman, the gaming historian's entry about the emulators against Sony, and according to the U.S. court, emulation is somewhat leaning more on the legal side as
Mm,
long as
you
the
own.
third party reverse engineered
Oh,
the program, as long as they're using actual gaming CDs, original CDs, you're not distributing them commercially, the games itself, okay? And you're not really stepping on patency and licensing issues.
yeah.
On the gray side, technically speaking, the emulator themselves are okay.
Mm,
So why did Sony cared so much? It's more about the money, the licensing. If you can
mm,
imagine, if you got a working emulator commercially being distributed to the masses, right? Then that means anyone can just make a video game for the Sony PlayStation. They don't have to go to Sony
they
for
can't license.
licensing fees.
Correct.
They can just go directly. They can just slap the game on a CD,
Mm,
put it on the Bleem, put it on the VGS, and you'll
mm,
just play, right?
yeah.
So eh, Sony will be losing a huge amount of money if they allowed this to happen.
Mm,
So, and I'm not even, I mean, say what you will about Nintendo, because
yeah.
Nintendo has their own kind of have their own mantra about emulation on this subject matter. But this was Sony at the time.
Mm. No, no, I can totally understand. Sony knows how lucrative the licensing aspect of video games are, and that's why they actually got into this market after seeing how well Nintendo were doing with Nintendo and Super Nintendo. So yeah, I can totally understand why they went down that route. But you know, if, it is what it is, I guess. Um, but yeah, any thoughts in regards to original hardware versus emulation? And pros and cons of either. I mean, I mentioned the Sega Mega Drive and Super Nintendo and PlayStation, but I'm sure I think there isn't really much more to say in regards to original hardware versus emulation. This is just something I've noticed from experience. So again, I noticed with Game Boy Advance as well, because that's another piece of hardware I'm familiar with. Sound is another thing that I've noticed that there isn't a correlation between the emulation and the original hardware. Also, certain games like Iridium 2 do suffer by emulation, where if you had the original hardware, it would just run better. So you've got to get these little niggly bits where the emulator will not be able to do 100% emulation. But it's good enough. It's good enough. And I will say for 16-bit emulation, you're fine. It's just you'll notice that the disparity starts to get a bit bigger when you get to bigger sizes. But now, well, when I say big size, I mean like 32-bit, 64-bit, 128-bit, and even the newer games today. But now we're living in an age where we have consoles with have dedicated GPUs. They're much easier to emulate if you have the power to do it. And so that all comes down to power and memory. Whereas there's always those odd things. And it is the Saturn and N64 I'm talking about, where they're the hardest systems to emulate because of just how over-engineered and how much money was thrown into them. It was ridiculous just how much they did with it. But yeah, so the pros and cons of the pros is okay, original hardware will always be better, but also you're paying a premium now with retro games if you want to play it that way. That's the truth. Let's just be honest here. It's all to do with the costs and way certain retro game systems are just too expensive. With emulation devices now, okay, you might pay a little bit for emulation devices, but the ROMs are just freely available. You can anywhere. You don't even have to work hard like to get them. They're quite simple because once it's on the internet, it stays on the internet. You can get it. I'm not saying that you should do this. There's always legitimate ways of doing it, but I'm just saying it's available, and you can get these games easy and they're accessible and they're free, and you can put them onto your handheld device, your PC, or even if you're quite capable on a mini console device and play it that way. And it's so much more affordable. What I will say is, look, when I go to these gaming markets, and this is me cannibalizing myself when I do this. As you guys know, I'm a handheld reseller, and I resell Game Boy Advance software, predominantly Nintendo DS, all the Nintendo handheld stuff. And this SNES Classic mini build that I've made totally undermines what I'm doing, and I have that set up on a television above my table, and there's a folder which says Game Boy Advance. It's got every single game I'm selling right in front of me on the table, boxing. And this thing, I sell it for, what was it, around £200 modded or whatever. And but there are Game Boy Advance games that are on their own £200 on their own, and that's how ridiculous collecting has gotten. If you can buy the original game with the original box, with the original manual, and all that. So I've got Pokemon Pinball, Ruby, and Sapphire sitting on my table for what, £220, and I was selling these for £200. But I guess people, there's always going to be a market for those who will want the original thing, the real deal. That Pokemon fan will want that original Pokemon product, regardless. But this is such a cost-effective way of playing that same game. Even though it doesn't give you 100% emulation, it's still good enough. It will still play generally at 55, 60 frames a second and give you that sound on a nice big TV. So I guess it depends on the individual, but and how much money they got in their pocket and how deep your pockets is, right? It depends on how deep your pockets are and which way you want to go. Another point I want to raise as well is, people go on about piracy. This is piracy, Virage. Nintendo, if they found out what you're doing, they'll have a field day. Well, Nintendo, if you really look at companies like Amazon, who are selling all this Chinese in, which have what I have, but in like a little Pi device, and they're selling those for a lot less than me. They have all these games on them. And this has been going on for years. So, Nintendo should really focus more on that. This is more of a labor of love, which has, art folders and all sorts of things if you're into that sort of stuff. Whereas with, what they're doing, it's just so rampant that there's so many emulation devices out there. I do think it's a very difficult thing for Nintendo to police, and all these other big players to police. So you do have that aspect. Not to say I'm promoting it. I'm just saying it is just there. It's just the status quo right now that it is available. But the pros of emulation is definitely the costs. The cost is so much cheaper to retro game on an emulation device. And it's not to say that the company is going to lose, or you're not going to get the original copy years later. Like, I made a point right now with Sir Joe. He translated Tales of Fantasia, and then he bought the physical game once it was officially localized. But that being said, he bought it from me. Okay, Nintendo didn't, or Namco didn't make money from it. The reseller got the money. I'm the one who made the money, right? Not so. Sometimes you wonder, like, is it really piracy to emulate? Because Nintendo, whoever made that game, the money was made when it was originally sold. That's already been done. If a reseller is just going to get the money, so is it really piracy if you were to emulate? And that's another interesting point as well. So I'm moving on to a dark area here, and I'm trying to justify this, but I'm just making a very valid point here, which is these video games that were released all those years ago, who's still paying for them? Who really is getting the money? Are Nintendo really getting the money for Super Mario World? They had a release on the Super Nintendo. They had a re-release on the Game Boy Advance. Okay, it's on Switch Online. I can play that game on Switch Online. But do they honestly expect me to pay this much money for a Nintendo Switch and subscribe and pay £18 a year just to play that game? It's ridiculous. Come on. It's not a consumerist option. It's an option if you have a Switch already, I suppose, and it's worth it. But there are other ways to do it. So that's legitimate emulation via Nintendo Switch. Okay, you can pay with Nintendo and pay through the nose. But even
Thanks for reminding me, Viraj. I need to cancel my Nintendo Online subscription. I haven't been using it.
There you go. And I'm thinking, it's good if you want to play it online versus or whatever, because it has its own unique selling points. But the same emulator on the Super Nintendo and Switch Online is available on the SNES Mini. It's the same emulator that they're using. And, I do think that, some people don't really want to be tied into Switch Online because, okay, you got the Nintendo 64 on Switch Online. And that's why this is what really saddens me is why don't they just make a dedicated Nintendo 64 Classic Mini? Because there are those people who don't want to just subscribe to it and get Switch Online. They just want to have those 20 games they can plug and play into their TV and be done with it for whenever they want. They want to pay, lifetime fee just to be able to access those games on Nintendo Switch Online. which requires you having to pay a Wi-Fi subscription. That's a really good point of cost out there. Wi-Fi, having the original hardware and paying subscription. I don't like the way that gaming is going in the way things are being subscription based for just want to play some old games. And I suppose Nintendo have every right to do that because it is their IP, it is their creation, and why not? But there are other ways of playing them now. It just seems like a no-brainer that emulation, be it buying it in the form of a mini console, or just being able to easily download it and play it for as many times as you want, at a decent quality, is there. And I would say that the pros of emulation outweigh the pros of playing it on original hardware, just simply based on cost. Because the cost, I think, is too high for them charging this much for games that were over 20, 30 years old. And they don't have to do this. Like recently I picked up one of these, and this is a very old system. I showed it last episode. This is the new Spectrum. And if you are to download games for it, it's free. It's not piracy. It's freely available. And that's because it's all abandonware. All these developers who made these games, they're all gone now, the way of the dodo. And you can just download a game and play it on it, and it's designed for that feature. And I do think that Nintendo should, and they won't anyway, let this whole thing go because they just want money, don't they? And I get it, but I think cost wise and playing on emulation devices, I would say emulation is a better deal if you're trying a retro game now, especially with the way prices are now. If you want to buy original software for these retro systems, they become collector pieces and they are expensive. All I will say though is when you do buy these original pieces of software, they're an investment. They'll only ever appreciate in price. So don't think, I've spent this much money on this game, good lord. You can actually resell it quite easily and get that money back. Whether you take $10 off or you make $10 on it, you'll make money on this game because it's just worth that much money. So that's my thoughts on original hardware versus emulation. I would prefer to emulate, and yes, the pros is yes, the original hardware will always run better. The con of emulation is typically it can be deemed as piracy, but is it really something that's been policed that heavily? Yes, if you're the person who runs the website, allowing people to download the ROMs, yes, Nintendo will come for you, and they came for me back in 2004, and that's when I ran a website called vgfuture.com, and they sent me an email explaining what I was doing, and I did shut down. I did delete the ROMs off the website, and I had to take it off because it was Nintendo of America telling me in Europe not to do it, and then my host was like, "No, Viraj, keep the ROMs on, keep the GBA games there, man. They can't do nothing. It's Nintendo America." I'm thinking, are you crazy? It's only going to phone Nintendo Europe, and then they'll come for me as well. That way, it is piracy. So I had to delete it. So they'll come for you if you're distributing the ROMs, but if you have them, it's very hard to police. It's all out there. It's kind of like with movies as well. You can easily pirate and download them, and if you're the one distributing it, they will come after you. But if you just happen to have it, it's very difficult for them to come for you. I'm not saying that you should do this, by the way, but I'm saying that it is something you can do. And I think, let's be honest, most people do it. If they can, they'll do it. And it's just one of those things. And that answers the question of why emulating today and why we should have what my personal preferences are. I think, look, personally, I'd like to try before I buy. And back in the day, I used to emulate a game, and I would actually buy a game legitimately if it was good enough and I had that ability. And this was before they had demo. They didn't have no demo devices for Game Boy Advance. I'll just download the ROM and play it. And as you guys have seen in my previous video, the Game Boy Advance, when I covered it, just how much I spent on the Game Boy Advance because I loved it. So emulation can actually lead to a company getting sales because the game's of a certain quality. But yeah, I do prefer, when it comes to retro gaming these days, because it's just hassle-free and easy, I prefer to emulate. But anyway, that's me and my thoughts on that. What I'm curious to know is, like, what do you prefer, original hardware or emulation? Why would you prefer one or the other? And what your personal preferences are and why you emulate. So let's start with you, Miss I.
So I would say I will kind of divide this into original and emulation and their pros and cons for me. I would say original hardware games run as intended. Like we have discussed earlier, on emulation, games tend to lag and the syncing of audio and video do not match. So that's a problem with emulation. But with original hardware, unless there's some actual problem with the game itself, it should run okay. And in theory, with original hardware, it should be plug and play, as in, yeah, plug and play. You don't have to download anything or tweak the emulator just to get the game going. And as for, like I said earlier, collectors, you have the physical games if you're really into collecting video games or just want something pretty on your shelf. So that's the pros of original hardware as I see it. However, the cons, I would say, if we are talking about retro games, it might be difficult to find certain titles because either they were not produced as much or
Yeah.
maybe they're the rare titles and prices might be sold for skyrocketing prices, which is making games legitimately inaccessible or inaccessible to players. And of course, there are region locks on certain consoles, and that might be a hindrance to original hardware. But then we've got emulation, and as I've said, um, you can you can bypass the region lock in certain circumstances. You can play as many games as you like, and you have the convenience of having everything accessible in one platform. So if you want to play everything on the computer, you got it. And like earlier, the Anbernic, if you want to play multiple multiple platforms in one device, portable device, then you got that. And I'm thinking since most of us stream here with emulation, well, I guess with original hardware, modern hardware at least, with emulation we can stream and share our games when we play them, at least the retro games, because older consoles do not have the proper ports that you can connect to the computer just to record the video
Well,
and stream it.
you can buy a card that basically goes into your TV, into your computer, so you can play it that way. And there are people, I can't remember what it was called. It's a certain capture card. It's a video capture card, and you connect that into your PC, into your TV, and that's how you can capture it that way. But that's something extra you have to do. It's just easier to seamlessly have the computer running that way. I know what you mean, but please continue. Go on. You can do
Oh, that's a good point, though. You can connect the TV, but directly to the console. Retro consoles do not have the capacity to, or the needed ports to do that. So you have to some workaround to make it happen.
Yeah.
And with emulation, maybe this is a pro. Players could make modifications to the game, like I said earlier, Sir Raj, quality of life improvements and modifications. It makes the games maybe more fun, or even on the silly side if people tend to make fun of whatever they want to do with the game,
Yeah.
bastardize it or whatever.
I've seen
And
a few guys ROM hacks out there. I saw a Streets of Rage really gay edition where this one for Sir Joe. He might like this. There's a character in Streets of Rage 3 that was taken out. I forget his name.
Oh yeah, I forget his name.
What was his name?
A Bobo.
No, not a Bobo. That's another.
That's a different.
That's River City Ransom. There's this Kyle or something. I can't remember his name. And he was actually a boss on the Japanese version of Streets of Rage 3, but they took him out in the localized Streets of Rage 3
Ash.
version. Ash, that's his name. They made a Streets of Rage game where you just play as Ash and you fight, and basically it's a stereotypical homosexual who is dressed in the same outfit of the same people in the Blue Oyster Bar and the Police Academy you get movies, and basically when he gets punched he starts crying, and like it's just like it's Streets Rage Sissy Man Edition or something. It's hilarious when you play it, but it is a bastardized version of the game. There's a lot of there's a Streets of Rage for all the perverts out there. So Dan, there's the Streets of Rage where you play as a naked sprite of Blaze, and stuff like that exist. So you're right.
Oh my god, there's a bunch of River City Ransom ones like that too.
Joe's looking out, his eyes are down. He's like, oh wait, where is this? But there are editions out there of games. There's actually a Streets of Rage. There's a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Streets of Rage. Where you get to play the Ninja Turtles in Streets of Rage too. There's even one where you get to play as the Terminator and Arnold Schwarzenegger or something. Mr. Arnold Schwarzenegger and all these other movie actors in there. There's so many colourful ROM hacks on that one game. But if you're a fan of that game, you want to check this stuff out because it's really funny what they've done. You can even play as Sonic in Streets of Rage. They've just done so many ROM patches. It's ridiculous. But there's so much fun with that. But please continue. I'm sorry. Well,
I'm actually surprised those exist. So that proves my point with making the games more fun with all the ridiculousness that creative minds have been able to make. So those are the pros for emulation for me. And then for the cons, like I said earlier, installation of the emulations, emulators might get tricky, especially for those not too tech savvy. And I ain't got no time to deal with all that tricking and whatever just to make just one game run on one system. Like I'll just drop everything.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Like, who's got time to play PlayStation 3 on a PC, right? Who's got time to wait for that game to download and then going through it all and having the money to have the computer run it? Just get a PS3 for cheap, hack it, and do it that way. Or just buy a PlayStation 3 game. They're cheap as anything now. You know, it's so cheap. But please continue, go on. Nobody's got time for that.
Nope, got no time for that. And then this point was raised earlier with the significant dropping of frame rates, causing the games to lag horribly and basically unplayable. So there's no point in emulation if you couldn't run the game properly. And some games actually don't get converted to ROMs correctly or get damaged. Remember last week I said one of my favorite Game Boy games was the Page Master. Unfortunately, the ROM available circulating around the internet is not the proper, I would say, it's not a good conversion. It's wrong.
Yeah, they ripped it wrong or something goes wrong. And you're absolutely right. Actually, this is a funny story, okay? When I ran the ROM site, I had this game called Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, and I got it a month before it was released. All right, I'll admit this. They're going to prosecute me, but this is the crime I committed. I don't work for the company anymore, so they can't fire me. I was responsible for the game section, and when a new Game Boy Advance game came in, it was my responsibility to put it out on the release date. The game in question that came in a month before it was even released was Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. So naturally, me being a young kid and a huge fan, I took the game out of the box. I took the cartridge. I took it home with me. I had a linking device and uploaded it and put it on the internet. I was the first person in the world to upload that game before it was even out on the shelves, even in America. And that's how I got a huge hit rate on the website. But going on that point, my ROM had an issue because I was in such a rush to load it. It didn't properly sequence onto it because it was like 3 megabytes or something silly. Like, it was more than that. It was a huge ROM size. And this one guy downloaded it and he was really upset because his save file didn't save properly and he got quite far into the game. And he goes, "What are you going to do to compensate me?" And I'm like, "You dumb bitch. What's wrong with you? You got this to compensate you. You know what I mean? Why don't you go out in the shop and buy it, you bastard? All I do is play the game and enjoy it and buy the game. The game is out on the shelf now. You got to play it well before. What are you going to do to thank me for allowing you to play this game before it was even released, you bastard?" I swear to God, I thought the audacity of this guy asking for compensation like he paid for something. I would just slap his face. Anyway, that's another story. But yes, you can. What happens is how that happens is you're in such a hurry to load the ROM on there, you pull it out before, or you don't let it sequence properly onto the thing when you drop it in, and then it becomes the .gba file or whatever. It can just happen because you lose bits when you transfer things sometimes, sadly, and you can lose important game information. And the issue with that Mario and Luigi ROM was it saved properly, so I had to drop the ROM again. So the first lot were crap, and I had to re-upload it, but. Hey, it is what it is. It is what it is. So I'm sorry about that, Miss Eileen, but I didn't put the Home Alone ROM on there.
Oh, the Home Alone works. The Page Master is the one that's broken.
Oh, sorry.
So yes, it's just a fun game, and if I just have the extra, let's say, cash for that, I would get the Page Master, the original Game Boy cartridge, because it's much more fun actual Game Boy because again the ROM is damaged, the visuals is wrong, they're missing pixels or whatever. It's not working properly. And speaking of working properly, Jose said earlier down there in the comments, he saw it on my stream one time that I was streaming Van Helsing on the PS2 and it lagged so bad that I had to switch to the Game Boy Advance version just to survive the stream because
Well,
my laptop was 7 years old when I streamed it. I think 2 years ago. Yeah,
also-
my new laptop can manage PS2 games now, but my previous one,
couldn't, yeah.
it was such a poor thing. It couldn't run PS2 games on
Yeah.
on streaming.
It's one of those
So,
things. It's only so much you can do, yeah.
Yes,
Oh,
the emulation hardware you're using is how your games depend on running properly. And in terms of modern emulation, remember there was a Switch emulator,
Yeah, yeah.
right? The con here is, legally speaking, the game developers or companies, those who should have received the payment or the royalties for the games, do not receive the proper compensation for their work. So that's quite a shame because, again, games are part of history and they are works of art. And it's sad that the creators do not get paid. That's the sad.
So there is the moral conundrum when a video game comes out and it gets pirated straight away and it's used by emulation.
Yes.
There are issues, but then I would argue my counter argument was look, my biggest downloaded GBA game when I ran the site was Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. It had over 30,000 downloads. Okay. Now, I would argue to you that the people downloading it were young people who didn't have jobs that weren't going to buy the game anyway, that couldn't afford it. But a portion of those people who could afford the game, saw the quality of the game, and went out and purchased that game because they could play it, try it before they buyed it. Another thing as well is those young people who tried it before they could buy it and played it on the GBA emulator, then came maybe 2 years later when they started becoming a working age, still saw that game on the shelf, bought the game. So I would argue that emulation could also be an aid to increase sales of that game. Yes, you're always going to get those people who just say, no, I'm not paying them no money. I've got it for free. I'm not paying for nothing. I'm happy playing on my PC. But then those of us who had a Game Boy Advance knows that it will play better on that original hardware at the time, which it did. It did. The sound emulation when the Game Boy Advance emulators were first out wasn't exactly the best. And the way that the frames would sort of skip it, on Game Boy Advance was an issue as well. But you could tour a game to know whether you would like it or not. And when you start off playing Final Fantasy Tactics Advance with that isometric snowball fight at the beginning, you know this is going to be a fun game. You know it. And that's why people fell in love with that game. I think that was the most popular downloaded GBA game on that site. That's a crazy thing. Of that E3 2003 for Game Boy Advance. So you're going to have those people who will pay money for it. But you're absolutely right. How much money? If you look at, let's say the game's worth £30. Yeah, that's what it retailed at. 30 times 30,000 is how much money that they lost in theory. Although I don't think that's entirely true because it's a phantom loss because they never had the money to buy the game in the first place. In fact, I would argue I put that game on the map for them. It's free promotion. And that those who could afford it got to play it and they actually went out and bought that game. But this is a very tricky grey area because we can never quantify it. It's a qualitative data and it will take ages to qualify, to find that qualitative answer. You can only look at it from a quantitative point of view, which is actually the game's worth 30 quid and 30,000 people download it from your website, Viraj. You cost Squaresoft and Nintendo money, give it back to them so you can look at it that way. And that's the only way you can really look at it because we're looking at it from a quantitative point of view. From a qualitative point of view, people have probably downloaded that game and bought it. We can't find out how many people did because you'd have to have a survey. It's impossible to know that. But no, you're absolutely right. If a new game was to come out and you could emulate it straight away, like with the Switch, yeah, and you've say if you've got Ube, like obviously Nintendo were quite right in going after the people who got the Switch emulator or whatever because you can emulate Switch games on your PC. I've obviously hacked my Switch, and that's just direct piracy. And that's something else completely. It's not emulation or hardware. But if you're like my friend, I'm not going to name him. He actually did have the Switch emulator, and they did come after the people who went with that Switch emulator, and they obviously shut it down. But he goes, well, I'll have to find another way to play Switch games, because in his mind, I refuse to pay Nintendo any money for their console, because that if any company deserves to be pirated, it's them, because of the way they behaved and the fact that their Nintendo system isn't even that graphically great anyway. That's his attitude towards it. But different people have different ideas, and you could always argue, well, Nintendo make enough money anyway. They are the dominant platform out there, after all. So how much are they really losing? That's a real question, isn't it? That's hard to quantify. And you can always argue, well, Nintendo get enough money and they still pump out crap games. That's what someone like Sir Dan would say. But anyway. But yes, you make a very noble point that, say, if it's it's that indie developer out there that could use your money. Yeah, the person who made 1980X or someone who made Shovel Knight, those sort of indie games, they're the ones who really need your money. Big players like Nintendo, they'll always win. It's like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They will always win because people go and see their film. That little indie movie, which needs your money, they're the ones that are going to struggle if you're going to pirate their movies. Same sort of thing with games. But yeah, very valid point. You should, and I'm happy to buy video games. I'm happy to buy them if I think they're good. That's my mentality. Although you can argue that's just incredibly self-righteous, and you're just rationalizing your bad behavior, Viraj, which is also true. All right. Thank you for your take, Miss Eileen. Anything else, or shall we move on to what Mr. Jose has to say?
Maybe just one more thing. I'm not sure if this is still a problem nowadays, but I remember my brother running EPSXC around the year 2002 or 2001, I think. And one of the problems we encountered was trying to find a controller that works on the computer. But again, I don't think this is much of a problem nowadays. So what he did was he bought a DualShock PlayStation 1 controller, did soldering and whatever, took it apart. He got it to work on the computer. I forgot, of course, it's not the USB era, so that was much more difficult during that time. He got it to work on the computer, but the Rumble did not work. So I'm thinking if there are still emulators, I guess the problem nowadays is the mapping, just that. But compared to older times, finding the correct control.
You touched on something that's very true. There's some things that you're going to have limitations. So, for example, I'll show you something. Don't laugh. Okay, I've got it right here. Okay. How can you emulate this? How can you emulate that?
How? How?
You want to emulate this? Yeah, how are you going to emulate this? There's certain things that are just locked to the piece of hardware that is designed to be mapped with. And, like we said back in the day when we first started emulating, we had a keyboard, and the Mega Drive controller, there wasn't one for a computer. And then you did get a tournament control, which would work, but it wasn't like... What I loved about the Mega Drive controller is you had 6 buttons, well, 3 there, but it would always be that 4-star controller. So my muscle memory was a bit off playing the game. So it's not going to be that authentic experience with controllers. So yes, you lose something on that scale. Even when I download some of the newer Mega Drive games that come out on ROM before I put it on my Mini and I'm playing it on my PC, just to see if it runs on Kega Fusion, which is the best Mega Drive emulator, it just feels wrong playing it on a keyboard now that I'm so used to using the controller. So you win some, you lose some. Right.
So that's about it for me. Thank you.
And also, again, with the Dance Dance Revolution, you need the map. You can't play DDR on your computer. Imagine that, your little monitor there and you're dancing. Obviously, or playing Connect, or even with the Wiimotes, with motion controls, there are limitations. My friend I gave him because he tried to emulate a Wii U, and I gave him my Wiimotes, and he goes, "No, I can't use them. They won't work." Of course, they won't bloody work. I could have told you that for free, you dumb idiot. But there are limitations. I say this with love, because I really do love this guy, because he likes to try things and he does try to push the boundaries. But anyway, all right. What about you, Sir Jose? What have you got to say for yourself in regards to emulation and your,
Oh, pros for the original hardware is it was the way it was originally meant to be played. You can't emulate the feel of the controller with something else. So like
muscle memory.
I mean, I play emulation with this Xbox controller, but this isn't.
I mean, I would say to you, that's heresy playing. If you were trying to play a Mega Drive game or a Saturn game with that, I'd say, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, it feels weird playing PlayStation games with this.
Look, there's the controller here. You got three
Yeah.
that are diagonally this way faced, and there's a
See-
reason for that with the games where the games were designed for it. With a four button layout like this thing, there's my Switch Pro controller. It just feels wrong trying to play with that. And then you can say, well, hang about, Viraj, beggars can't be choosers. These people have downloaded these games for free. In fact, they can't afford a controller. They'll make do. They'll adjust to the controls. You know, and for somebody like this one guy is part of them. Is a dear friend of mine from Australia named Jarkus, and he goes, Viraj, back in those days, nobody had a Mega Drive and a SNES. You had one or the other. So you might go on about saying, oh, you should have had a Mega Drive. You should play Mega Drive games on a dedicated Mega Drive Mini, and you should play SNES games on a bigger. He goes, no, I've modded my SNES Mini to play Mega Drive games. Okay, that muscle memory you talk about, because I never had a Mega Drive because I was poor and not rich like you. All right, I don't privilege like you. Okay, that doesn't mean anything to me. I will play Earthworm Jim or whatever Mega Drive game in that 4-button style because it doesn't bother me. So I'll play it however I damn well please. So shut up. That's what he said to me, and he's absolutely right in saying so. Because if you experience the original hardware, one controller that fits all isn't going to bother you. You know, for someone like me who's had experiences with multiple controllers, we're the problem because we're so used to playing the game the authentic way. And there's a majesty to it. But you know what? If you've got one controller that works for everything, that Xbox controller you showed me now, Jose, by all means, and if you're happy with it, fine. Game how you want to game. Who am I to play King of the Castle here? I'm just used to playing and the authentic way. But I'm really, it's crazy because here's me modding these minis. But I only keep Sega stuff on here because it makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I don't even have the system on there. I only keep Nintendo stuff on Nintendo because I'm a bit of a stickler. But I understand controller mapping is a very personal thing. Well, what's Richard say? He's got controller mapping is no longer an issue thanks to direct input. And it's directive API plus. There are third-party programs. Yeah, so you have direct X and X input and all sorts of things. So it helps a lot. But you know, it's if you have those controllers. You know, and again, this is to do with money. If you want to spend money on those controllers and playing it via PC and all that. But if you've got one controller and you're comfortable with it, and you know your Switch Pro controller is the one you want to go to, why not stick with it? But call me crazy. I just like different controllers. That's me. But
no, I do too. It's just what happens to be right in front of me at all times. Because like you can just connect anything if you have an adapter or the cord for it.
It's finicky and it's a hassle.
Yeah.
It's a hassle now, and there's so many consoles. Like, are you crazy, Viraj? Crazy? Like, what is it? One controller? The amount of money I've spent on controllers. If you see this room, it's just littered with controllers. It's just stupid. Like, you need a controller for this. I mean, I actually managed to convince Sir Rick and the Sega Mega Masters to buy it. That that big cyber stick I just picked up with the levers. He's bought one of those off me. So you know what? You can't play a Taito Egret 2 Mini and play games like Night Strikers or Top Landing. I mean, it's an aircraft landing simulator. How can you not have a cyber stick? How can you play it? So I coerced him, shall we say? Oh, I shouldn't say coerced. I pushed him. I convinced him into buying one. And he needs it, to be honest. But you don't really if you're happy with just the controlling. So it's whatever you can afford. And that's a limitation. So Joel said earlier about price could be one of those things. It's money. And in terms of emulating that game on that system legitimately or whatever. But anyway. Go on, Sir Jose. What would you say?
Let's see. The cons, like everyone's been saying, you have to own the games. Games are expensive. And then it's like the one thing no one talks about, but eventually these things are not going to work one day.
So video game preservation.
Yeah. One day these games are not going to work. The consoles are not going to work. We're going to need...
Well, okay, look, I'll say disc rot is a problem with CDs, and the benefit of CDs where they're a digital format. They don't degrade every time you play them like videotapes. I know that the tapes for the Commodore 64 have started to have degraded because they're magnetic. With cartridges, if you keep them in a dry room, away from damp and sunlight, you should be fine. But you're right. The amount of times you slide the cartridge in and out that slot.
I mean, eventually it's going to stop working, even in the best conditions.
Eventually, but there are people creating reproduction cartridges as well.
Yeah.
But then there's the original. Some people are just sticklers for that. I get what you mean. Yeah, video game preservation. Another way to play your collection is via that. And yes, like one of the things I did with GBA emulation and why, even though I owned the original game, half the times the games would sit in their boxes because I wouldn't like to take them out of the boxes and wear out the boxes and just to play the game. Like, what is this? Like, I want to keep it in good condition, so you just emulate them. It sounds so pathetic, but no, I understand.
Pros for emulation, there's thousands of games out there for you to play, multiple emulators, and if you're into it, you can add filters and shaders and all kinds of stuff to make it look better. Cons, you have to have a PC capable of doing this stuff. Like you said, Saturn is very finicky. Or you have to own something like this. This is the analog NT Mini. So
that's original. That's not emulation. That's FPGA.
Yeah.
So that is actually So now we've got a point now where a Mega Drive in a sense, or Genesis in a SNES, you have the analog Super, Mega SG, and you have the Super NT analog.
Yeah, this one right here.
Oh, beautiful! Look at that. I mean, the American says it's ugly, but I actually like that design. Even though it's got those ugly purple colors, which I can't stand.
But for the people who are there, you go. The Retron. For the people who are on the audio podcast, Jose has been showing off his hardware, and he's been showing off his analog consoles as well as his Retron machine from Hyperkin. Define a little bit of background, Jose. Define FPGA. What is FPGA for the people who do want to learn a little bit more about it?
FPGA. Oof. I don't know if I'm the one that could explain this.
Basically, it's having hardware as close to the original.
Yeah, as close as possible.
It's very close because you've got the gateway that will allow the games to run the way that they were originally intended to on original hardware. Really, ladies and gents, the analog systems out there. So you've got the Mega SG Super C. They've done a TurboGrafx 16 one recently, and there was also the handheld, the analog,
the Pocket
as well. Original FPGA with the Mister, basically, in layman's term, it is just literally going to run the original hardware as intended. It's a replica, an exact replica, one-to-one replica. So Rick has a Mega SG, and he told me all about it. And that's basically, it's not emulation. It's the more authentic way to go. And so you don't wear out your original hardware. And also the beauty of that thing is it's HDMI out, isn't it? So it will work on modern televisions, which are Mega Drive or not. So it's less hassle. And you don't. It's basically a Super Nintendo with HDMI out, and that's the way you want to play Super Nintendo if you want to play it original way. And that's what I would do personally. The problem is they don't make enough of these, and then they change scalping prices now. So if next time they do a release, just pre-order and buy one from them direct. It's the best way to do it.
Like these two, you can't even buy them anymore.
No.
And then both of these are jailbroken, so I have the entire library of games on these.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just don't understand why they make them limited, because they don't want to make a loss. I get it. They just want to buy it for people who genuinely want to pay the $200 or $300 or how much it's selling for. But yeah, you've got SD cards and pay the ones that way. And another way that people do it is EverDrive carts.
Yeah, that's true.
Crix is the company which creates the official EverDrive, which is a cartridge for the Mega Drive or Super Nintendo you can buy, and it slots in. I know this is a model, and it slots inside. There's an SD card that goes in there, and it will basically it's ROMs running on there, which is which is not legit or whatever, but it's another way to play via original hardware. So those of you who are sticklers for playing on original but don't want to pay a fortune for the software, that's another way you can do it. And you can do it via the analog systems as well, which is really a good way out of paying for ridiculous prices for retro games and playing it that way. Yes, again, going back to the argument of is it piracy? Isn't it piracy? I suppose it depends on who made the game. Is it abandonware, or is it really software that's still being resold today? Would Nintendo come for you? That's down to you and your conscience and what you think. Is there a right or wrong? Or technically, yes, there is a wrong if we look at the law or the legal side of things. But then part of me thinks that the vast majority of retro games are not being resold anymore, and the only person who will really benefit if you buy them is the reseller. It's not the original artist, like Miss Eileen said. And these are other ways to play these games on the cheap. And I am an advocate for emulation. I'll say it. I am because I think that it's just an affordable way to play retro games, an easy way to get retro games. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm all for as a reseller, I'm all for owning the original hardware as well. I get it. I totally get it. There's something wonderful about, and I lament the days when I went to the shop and my dad would buy me a video game, and I'd look at the back of that box and read through the blurb. I'd open the box, I'd look at the manual, I'd read that thing like it's like the Bible or something, read it every word for, because it'd be a story about the video game. I do miss those times, because now we're coming to an end of that with physical media, and that in itself is its own discussion. And and having the cartridge, there was something really special about owning that. And if you're into that, by all means, go for it. Because physical media is an investment. People say it's expensive, but like I see Jose. I see he's sitting. I want to know where he lives, because I know where to rob now. I'm gonna go rob him. He's sitting on a fortune, man. There's like there's thousands of pounds for video games behind him, man. I want to know where all of you live. But I'm kidding. But no, you're sitting on an investment. Say if things get tough, like RGT85 is a YouTuber, right? Recently, he had a video like last year saying he's given up on retro collecting, and he's going to have to start selling his collection. I found out from a source that the reason he had to sell it is because he had his medical bills come through, and he had to sell the games to pay for his medical. And fortunately, he had he sold them and he could pay his medical bills. So it's an investment in that regard. It helped him. It wasn't what he wanted to do. He should have had insurance that covered him, but he managed to sell, well, not all his collection, a vast chunk of it. He's still got a big collection to pay for his bills. So, there are an investment owning the original software. I just want to put it out there. I know we haven't spoken much about owning the original software, but there is something really special, and people will always collect for it. Emulation, I don't really see as a threat to people who collect retro games. Those who want to collect retro, they're aware of emulation, but they want to have the real thing, and I totally get it, and I totally accept that as well. But at the same time, also accept that not everybody has the sort of income that can fuel that kind of hobby, because it's just ridiculously expensive. I saw a YouTuber boasting that he got a bargain because he got Mega Man X2 on the Super Nintendo, box and complete, for £800. He called that a bargain. £800. What can you buy with £800? A lot. So I get it. But yes, Jose, some very good points there. Anything else?
No, that's it for me.
Done. Okay, JDM, what have you got to say in regards to?
All right, hang on. Before we proceed with Sir JDM, we are 30 minutes over time now. So what we'll do, Sir JD, we got a few more here. Sir JDM and Sir Joel will go next in order. They'll just talk about original hardware versus emulation, the pros and cons, why they should advise to emulate today, and their own personal preferences. Okay, we'll just offer them the remaining time uninterrupted, guys, so that we can get through this. All right, Sir JDM, go on ahead.
Okay, so to save time, I'm just going to talk about the pros and cons of the emulation side of things, because I think most of us already discussed the pros and cons of the original hardware. So for me, with emulation advantages, now you now have RetroArch. Then you also have Linux-based emulators, or like all-around emulator platform, which is Batocera, which you can use like a flash drive that you can just stick into the USB port of your PC or your laptop. Then you don't need to go to your OS anymore, because it has its own standalone OS that you could play your consoles with, emulators with. You just have to amass the ROMs and adjust the controls so you could play those games. And then for the disadvantage, what's bad with what's worse than frame skipping, the glitches in your games, is not being able to play those games due to compatibility issues. There are some games that don't even go through the loading screen, or when you push the menu button, it doesn't show the actual menu like in RPG games. That is worse than the frame skip or the graphical and audio glitches, because some, even if you have the most powerful machine ever to play those emulators, you won't be able to play them because these compatibility issues. So I think that's it for me with the emulation side of things.
Okay, over to you, Sir Joel.
Go on ahead. So, what should you advise emulating today, and what's your personal preferences?
So let me just combine that subtopics now. So for me, personal preference, just play whatever, whenever. If you don't have the luxury of paying for the consoles that you would like to play the games that you would like to play, then you can just go ahead and boot up your PC, use the emulator for that game, and you don't have to. It's just for practicality. If you don't have those consoles, then maybe you could just find another way to play those games. And why emulate today? Because of the soaring prices of the games, not just the retro games, but also the games right now. Like they're selling for how much? Like 60, $70 per game. So some people are not that rich to play or actually own the consoles for those games. So they just try to find other ways to be able to access those games and play it. So go on ahead. There's no discrimination. What's that saying? Um, we we listen and we don't judge.
All right, Sir Joel. Pros and cons. Why they should emulate, and your personal preferences.
All right. Well, I'm speaking on, from the point of view of somebody who's old. Okay. Emulation is convenience for me. We're talking like I don't have to haul out all my old consoles, try to find a way for it to connect from the blasted circular thing to HDMI or whatever. I don't have to buy any extra peripherals to like capture card or stuff like that. If it runs on my PC, if it runs on my handheld, I play it where I can, however I can, and I enjoy it. If there are certain ones that I can't play, like Virage Illustrated, there are certain ones that require a particular hardware set. Yeah, tough bananas. I'm not gonna play it. I'm just gonna find something else that I will play that I will enjoy. Time for me is limited already. We're talking like time, space are all at a premium. We're talking about something that is slowly going away from me on a trickling basis, and I have to maximize what I have already. Now for emulation, that allows me to play all the things that I do want at a most convenient way on my PC, on my handheld, on an Amazon Fire Stick. If I so chose, I could hack an Amazon Fire Stick, connect it to the large TV, and run Atari Jaguar games on it, whatever. That's the thing. So convenience for me is paramount, and price isn't really a big factor, because if I really wanted, I could buy the most expensive game out there, no problem. But will it be convenient for me to play it? It might not be convenient for me to try to hook up the hardware that allows me to play that particular game. So emulation, of course, there's also upscaling. PlayStation 2 games, PlayStation 1 games that get upscaled to an amazing degree where it is pleasurable to my optics already. My old eyes enjoy the visuals that are coming out, that are not blocky and pixelated and whatever. Some people will say CRTs, Joel, are the way to go. I'm sorry, but I'm not gonna lug 100-pound CRT TV just to play a game that is not that is not going to be pixelated and blocky. I'm just gonna play it and I'm just gonna run a shader on it. Screw it. The fact is, convenience for me is the best thing to do. Is the best approach when it comes to emulation. And to be perfectly honest, it is the thing that I would recommend the most for somebody who is looking at emulation. Plus, it is the most efficient way for you to study technological and video game history. You don't have to hunt down the actual hardware for you to actually experience what it's not an exact experience, but it's an approximation of how people must have experienced it long ago. You don't you If you're really looking for authenticity, just build yourself a damn time machine and go back in time. Go go play it during the era that it was actually at. No, I am not that kind of guy. If somebody says, playing it on a Sega Genesis controller is the authentic way to go, well, you do jack off to whatever you feel like jacking off to. But
Right.
for me, if the convenience of an Xbox controller, which is convenient, I can map it, it feels good to my hands, it functions well enough that I can play the game, that's what I'm gonna do. The fact is, emulation is the way for me to do to study what happened before without having to actually go to the arduous process of hunting down authentic hardware, authentic software, and everything. And it is the positives outweigh the negatives. Sure, it is a gray area sometimes, but the education and the history that it passes down to people of future generations, like my daughter, for the person who is interested in technology because he wants to get into computer science, it is an invaluable tool. Heck, even virtual machines that allow you to emulate old OSs like Windows 3.1, Windows 95 is emulation in itself. And if you want to study history, that is the way to go. Sure, you can build yourself an amazing 486 PC with SGI graphics or whatever. But the fact is, it's just more work than it's worth. I guess that's the right term for it. For somebody who wants to garner as much information and education as they can possibly get in a short amount of time. So emulation, I would say, is the best way to learn about history, technology-wise and video game-wise. And sure, if you want authenticity, like I said, do what you like, and I will not hold that against you. That is something that I will applaud you for. But for a vast majority of people who just want to play, who just want to learn, who just want to enjoy, emulation is the way to go, and that is what I recommend.
Yeah. That's very good. Very well put. Very well done, Sir Joel. I totally agree with you on all your points. You've got Eric Wahlberg joining us in the comment section here. This is kind of a controversial opinion. I hope he doesn't mind me saying this. I had a conversation with him a few months back, actually, because he's a producer of a certain video game on Sega CD called Eternal Champions: Challenge of the Dark Side. And I said to him, you do realize what I'm doing, right? And I told him what I did with the Mini, and I put the game on there. And it's a game you produce. I'm selling it as part of like a whole compendium of games that other people can play. How does that make you feel? Because it could be argued that that's piracy. He goes, yeah, well, you know what, Viraj, that game hasn't had I'm paraphrasing here, because the game hasn't had a release. It's not been re-released. It's stuck on that hardware. And he goes, well, Viraj, will more people get to play that game? He goes, well, yes. And he goes, well, I've got no problems with that. Because he worked hard on that game and he wasn't exposed to so many people. I don't know if it even sold 1 million. I don't even think it even sold 1 million copies. It didn't even do 500,000. So few people have experienced that game. But if I'm selling it with this build of mine and people be able to play it, that was put into it will be recognized. So there's so many facets, so many angles. Sadly, I can see that at the time we've been yammering, and we've made so many points here. We talked about so many things. We can still continue talking about it. We can talk about how light guns won't work on your computer, and you need to have original hardware for that. We can talk about dual screens, Nintendo DS touch screens. You can't emulate that. So yes, with certain pieces of hardware, they're just very difficult to emulate. Richard says there are some cases that getting an actual machine is next to impossible, and emulate is a way to go in terms of practicality. Yeah, you're right. the Sharp X68000 is expensive. It's an expensive Japanese computer. People just emulate it, and even the Mini's expensive. And it's just not commercially viable.
Actually, that's another thing, Viraj. I do want to delve into past libraries like the ZX Spectrum and the Amiga, and the best way to do that would be through emulation. You know,
Because it takes so long for those games to load on the original hardware as well. It's ridiculous. So there's so many quality of life improvements. But we're 2 hours 40 minutes in. I think we've run out of time. So
All
I
right.
think
What we'll do before we close shop, we'll go to Miss I and Sir Jose. Miss I, why they should emulate today, and your personal preferences, to be followed by Sir Jose with the same questions.
Like it was said earlier, I would say emulate today because of game history preservation. Someday the games will not be playable if nobody is playing them or turning them into accessible files, ROMs, whatever. And talking about video games, since they are expensive, this emulation is the only feasible way to play the games for those who cannot afford, well, even those who can afford the actual hardware, but they are sold with exorbitant prices. And of course, you can enjoy the games the way you want to play them, whether all in one computer or all in one portable device. And personal preferences, I do like DOSBox, like Sir Joel, because I could play the games I grew up with. I use Virtual Boy for the Game Boy games, ZS Nestle for the Super Nintendo games, DuckStation for the PlayStation 1, Melon DS for 3DS. Sorry, this is long PPS, SPP for PSP, and PCSX2 for the PlayStation 2. And RetroArch for other consoles. If, like me, you do not know which are the particular emulators for the particular console. So that's for me.
All right. Sir Jose.
Yeah, like Miss I said, one day this stuff isn't going to work, so we need digital formats of everything to be able to play it, or digital copies, I mean. And then just my personal preferences, I like to use a program called Launchbox that has DOSBox and RetroArch integrated into it, and it just makes everything look really nice on the screen. Everything just works. If it needs certain files, it'll let you know. If it needs an emulator, it'll tell you where to go. It's just really easy and nice way to have your emulated collection on your computer.
All right.
very good.
I'll try to answer all three questions at the same time. I am the opposite of Sir Joel as much as the way I honor my video games is playing through hardware. Doing this show with all of these people, that's the only time that I resort to emulation if I don't have the actual hardware. If a particular game that I want to discuss, I have a hardware for it, I will play it on the actual hardware. And I'm a streamer too. So if it's something so retro, I have my Retro Think 5X. If I need something CRT, I got a capture card that can go through the CRT. That's fine. If I have those, I still have the time to get all of the boxes out and set it up. Because to me, personally, as a personal thing, that's how I tend to honor these games as much as possible, but playing them on the actual hardware they were meant to. I got a Saturn to play Saturn. I got a Nintendo 64 for crying out loud, just to play some old wrestling games that I wasn't able to years ago. Just for a bunch of wrestling games, really buying an N64? I could have just emulated that, but no, fuck that.
Yeah.
If I have the means, sure, why not? Right? I can afford it now. Sure. Took me this long. A little bit more convincing. Sure. As much as possible with the emulation, with the emulation devices that's coming out now, I tend to abstain in getting them. Okay, my personal prerequisite, if a gaming emulating device can play PS2, Dreamcast, Saturn, PSP without any issues whatsoever. No
Mm.
compatibility issues whatsoever. Then sure, I will buy that damn thing in a heartbeat. However, as
Yeah.
much as emulating on the go, the best that I can offer you guys is a PS Vita.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Or
if
a
you're able to
3D.
mod that, sure, you can go as much as PS1.
Yeah.
If you don't want to go any further than that,
Mm.
that is arguably, Sir Joel might agree with me on this one. The PS Vita might be your best choice in terms of portability, in terms of you can carry it whenever, even in your pocket. Sure, go with the Vita. All right. Then, all right, Sir Viraj.
Yeah, the 3DS is also another good one to mod as well. But anyway, no, I think you've all raised some very very compelling points. The perspectives that I didn't even know existed until you guys mentioned them to me. I thought, oh wow, yeah, I never thought of it like that. So I'd like to thank you all for raising these points and having this lovely, colourful discussion with me because I didn't. I thought, oh wow, that's why you do it. That's why you do it. That's what you do it. So as a person who's very much into retro gaming and a reseller, it gets me an idea of what your consumer psychology is and how you would like to game. And it's very valuable. So I'd like to thank all of you on the panel. I'd also like to thank all of you who joined us on the comment section, and raising, making your points, and it adds value to the show. So I'd like to thank all of you. To conclude, look, yes, I would say, look, the point Miss Arnie made is very, very true. Like, you should buy video games. You should support the developers on the system. You shouldn't be emulating the system while it's already out. You should be funding those video games. And she's absolutely right in that regard. However, if this generation's bygone and those studios aren't capitalizing on those IPs which have been bought and sold or whatever, and you can emulate it and you want to go back and play it, and for all the various reasons that Sir Joel mentioned about how it's convenient and all sorts of things, by all means do it. I'm not saying that you should, because if it's piracy, you shouldn't, because I have to say that as a disclaimer for the show. But if it's available, didn't see it, didn't happen. But it's one of those things. So if it's accessible, go for it. And if you need help, there's so much information in there. I do know that a barrier is knowledge in how to emulate. You have to know how to use computers. You have to know how it works. So it's one of those things. But there's enough information, enough help out there now than there was when we were all doing it in the dark ages, because the internet was a very different place then. But yeah, really, really good episode, guys. So thanks for that. Yeah, back to you, Sir Joe.
All right, thank you for all of your input, guys, to the panel right here and to the chat down there, Sir Eric and Sir Jomar. Hello, hello, hello. And despite late, but still, you're still welcome to the party. Let's do our shameless plugs. Sir JDM, where can they find you?
You can find me on Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube. 123 Go Retro, and that's it.
Thank you for that, Sir JDN, and of course, Miss I.
You can find my past video on demand on Twitch and YouTube, but mostly YouTube. I'll try to stream whenever I can, which is I'm not sure when.
And
Ain't
we're
got
not
no
going
time.
to. And I think she's going back to work in a couple of weeks. So if you want to get your fix of Miss I, you know where to go.
YouTube.
Sir Jose.
On Twitch and YouTube, basically anywhere social media, Dark Gothic Fate. That's about it. Well, that's about it.
That's about it. The Jotaro. JoJo fan right here. And of course, Sir Joel.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody, for hanging around, watching the show, listening to our discussion about emulation and emulated games. You can find me on various parts of Facebook, posting whatever I feel like, and streaming occasionally on Twitch.tv, Kick.com, and on Rumble.com. #FUFB. And you will always find me here on the Timeless Gamer Show, unless some other prior engagements prevent me from doing otherwise. But that is it. And thank you so much, everybody. We're very, very happy to have you here. Make sure that you comment on our videos even after the show has ended, because we love reading your comments. Back to you, Joe.
And speaking of FUFB, YouTube still flagged our wrestling episode for the third time,
Oh,
copyrighting us for some reason. I don't
For
know why.
what?
That's what we're doing wrong. Anyways, Sir Viraj.
Right, yeah, you can find me on the Sega Mega Masters channel on YouTube. There's a few odd episodes we got there. You'll find me in the Sega Genesis group on Facebook. I'll be trading at the Leeds Gaming Market on the 2nd of February for those of you in the UK watching this, which I doubt, because most of you are all international. And also you can find me here on this channel, where it's my second home now, isn't it? I pretty much come here all the time, or most of the time anyway. But yeah, thank you. Back to you, Sir Joe.
All right, thank you for that, Sir Viraj. And that's it, guys. That is the show. Since we got Sir Eric Wahlberg down there, I think it's about time. We will we will continue our where we left off on our Dungeons and Dragons episode. So that some of these panels right here can take a break from the show. So we're gonna call back the band together
The Merry Band.
again to continue the D&D episode. Hopefully, we will be able to do that the next time, next week. So that's it, guys. Thank you all so much to the panel and the chat. And as always, our games and our bodies may grow out of date, but our gaming experiences forever remain. Hey,
Timeless. All right, guys. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Have a good one.